3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. It's an odd week, this. I don't know how much of it you've clocked. It feels like quite a momentous week to me for news. Not oddly, if you're interested in such matters, not necessarily a momentous week for phone-in topics, but there's a lot going on, isn't there? I think it's deeply significant that Kemi Badenoch seems to have been mugged by reality when it comes to Brexit. It's pretty remarkable to see one of the stormtroopers of the so-called culture wars acknowledging that the bedrock of the culture wars is falling to pieces. The bedrock, of course, being Brexit, the idea that you talk things up and invent problems in order to enrage and distract people, being the bedrock of culture war and indeed the rationale for Brexit. So she's now accused conservative Brexiteers, that dreadful word which the Times even uses today, of talking, not doing, as she robustly defended plans to recognise reality. I mean, crikey, better late than never, don't you think? This idea, what do you mean they all just talk and don't do? None of them ever had a plan for anything. None of them ever had the vaguest idea how to deliver all of the ludicrous promises that they continue to make. Alistair Campbell on Newsnight last night, coming up against a frightful woman who once got busted for fibbing about working for Cambridge Analytica. It was quite an incredible moment. And she, I guess that's all they can find. Even the BBC now can only find completely busted flushes in order to pretend that there is a wonderful Brexit out there. It just goes to a different school. Everyone who's defending it publicly is disowning it. So that I thought was quite momentous. And then you've got the public order situations, completely innocent people, we learnt yesterday. Indeed, royal superfans being rounded up alongside Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil protesters and stuck in the back of a van. You need to have watched Withnell and I to understand what just happened to my voice there. And if you haven't, I've just done you an enormous favour, because you should watch it. It's an absolute masterpiece of a British film. And then, of course, the immigration bill, the illegal bill that Suella Braverman continues to try to put through the House of Commons with opposition from those bastions of British values, the King, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the former head of the British Army, even the sort of chief rabbi joining in, and many other people as well. And I don't know why I had a sense this week of profundity, of big news, big events. Donald Trump, of course, finally being found by a court to be exactly what he told us he was many years ago, i.e. a sex offender. That felt like a moment. And then CNN arguably undid an awful lot of the progress made on that field by giving him more or less a free pass on being his characteristically obnoxious and disgusting self on live television in America. I don't know why. I just felt there was an awful lot going on this week. A really big week for news, a really big week for politics on both sides of the Atlantic. Which makes it odd, perhaps, that I've chosen to start this morning's programme by talking about your mortgage. Interest rates went up yesterday to their highest level in 15 years. When the Daily Mail, after 13 years of Tory rule, has a headline that says millions to pay £10,200 more for their mortgages, fresh misery as interest rates reach 15-year high, then we are required to take notice. I mean, they probably won't go so far as to blame any of it on the government that they continue to cheerlead for, just as they cheerlead for the discredited governments of Liz Truss and Boris Johnson before her, not to mention Theresa May. That was the steal of the new Iron Lady, and even David Cameron. Remarkable, really. If they were going to a bookmaker's with their political predictions and their political preferences, they'd be bankrupt by now. But of course they're not. They just continue to shift their loyalties from one Tory disaster to another. But and similarly, the economic impacts of Brexit, whatever they may be in the context of interest rates and mortgages, are unlikely to be mentioned by the Daily Mail. But that headline stopped me in my tracks. Millions to pay £10,200 more for their mortgages. We started taking calls when we weren't even looking for them this week, when we were talking about, or possibly last week, when we were talking about the Skipton Building Society bringing in a rather old-fashioned mortgage, a 100% mortgage. If you could prove that you could pay your rent, that you'd paid your rent successfully. We didn't pick up on the ultimate irony. Do you know what the ultimate irony was that morning? Some of the coverage suggested that if you could demonstrate that you'd kept up your credit rating, then you would be able to get a mortgage without a deposit. And guess what one of the ways in which you can keep up your credit rating was? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? A Netflix subscription. Now, that is funny because for quite a long time, residents of Idiot's Corner and sundry other Herberts were telling young people that the only reason why they couldn't afford to go on the property ladder was because they spent too much money on Netflix and avocados. I used to be the only person left in England who called them avocado pears, but I have now progressed at least from that verbal anachronism. So far from being something you should give up in order to increase your ability to save a £30,000 deposit, your Netflix subscription could actually have been something that improved your possibilities today of getting any mortgage at all. So it's strange times that we live in. Would you forgive me for not being very expert on the issue of mortgages? I'm not. I mean, I know roughly where we are. I know what we've got, and we're all right because we went for a 5-year last year, so we're okay for the duration and the foreseeable. But as I understand it, people whose fixed rate mortgages are coming to an end, or indeed people who are on variables, are currently on a pretty hideous run. Now, the reason I crave your forgiveness is because the total rate is still 4.5%, and yet in the enormous housing crisis that we witnessed in the 1980s, interest rates were well into double figures. Now, I understand part of the reason why panic is setting in now, despite figures being so much lower than they were then, but I don't understand all of it. The bit I understand is obviously the difference in equity. The amount that you have in your house will save you. These days, the size of the mortgage compared to the size of the property, the price of the property is going to be much, much bigger in percentage terms, so you get hit much quicker when interest rates go up. I think all of this is open to criticism and indeed contradiction. I hope in a friendly fashion. Renters, as Julie reminds us, will also be affected by this, particularly affected by this because landlords will be paying increased interest rates on their mortgages as well. So this is not a story about the lucky few, if we can describe mortgage holders as few or lucky. It's a story about anybody who lives in a property, the owner of which has taken out a debt to a lender. And I mean, the analysis that the Mail has done shows that those on variable rates will soon be paying £10,200 a year more than they were 18 months ago. The third reason why I crave your apology is because I read that with a sense of disbelief. How can you find another 10,000? I mean, you're on a decent scratch, let's say 50 grand, right? You can't find 10 grand a year after tax, in addition to what you've already got. And some people won't be able to find 2 grand a year. Some people will struggle to find 200 quid. The way things are going at the moment, the cost of living with regard to food, the cost of living with regard to energy, the cost of living with regard to clothes and shoes, all the things that big old Jacob Rees-Mogg promised you would be cheaper by now, are measurably and considerably more expensive. How are you going to do it? How are people going to find it? So we don't do that. We used to do this all the time, but we don't so much anymore. This is a conversation much more about the what than the how. I just want to know what's going on with you. Give us a call, 0345 6060973. If you are... listen, the point is, the reason I mentioned the Daily Mail and their headline and their little, analysis from L&C mortgages based on 25-year mortgages is that they're just numbers, but they are arresting numbers. And I want to do the case studies, which will be in tomorrow's newspapers. You'll have the case studies in tomorrow's newspapers. There wasn't time to get them into today's papers. And I think it's important that we know what's going on around us, that even if you're not going through this yourself, even if you're not panicking yourself, your neighbours might be. It is absolute chance. It's a pure lottery that will have determined when you took your mortgage out and, to a slightly lesser degree, what sort of mortgage you got. Ditto your landlord. Some landlords, and I suspect some are going to put their rent up because their fellow landlords are doing it. So you've got a landlord here whose mortgage is going to go up as a consequence of interest rate rises, possibly exponentially. Therefore, they're putting up their rent. What happens to the landlord over there who's still happily committed to a 5-year fixed rate mortgage? If he sees what the person over the road is getting for the same flat, I mean, he doesn't have to be Rackman, does he, to think, well, I have a bit of that as well, even though my actual figures haven't gone up. My mortgage payments haven't gone up. The fellow over the road has put up rents because his have, and his flat's still full. So I'll have a bit of that. It's the same principle that makes me very pessimistic about the prospect of supermarkets introducing major price cuts, even as the wholesale costs come down. For the very simple reason, why would they? You know? If, for example, the cost of living came down by a significant amount in the next few months, I'm not going to go to the management here at Global Radio and suggest that they pay me a bit less. So why would a supermarket that's currently charging £1,000 for a box of tomatoes and selling them, why would they cut the price of the tomatoes? So that's the point. I don't know how I ended up comparing tomatoes to buy-to-let landlords, but if you listen to this programme on a regular basis, you won't be surprised. So there it is. I guess I'm asking, how bad is it? Which means that watchers of the industry, participants, members of the industry can call in and tell us. And then the people caught smack in the middle of the story, the case studies, the people who are looking at rises in interest rates and expiry of previously arranged mortgages or increases in variable rate mortgages. And I don't like asking this question, but I think we should. Are you beginning to panic a bit? I've got friends who are beginning to panic a bit. I've got colleagues who are beginning to panic a bit. A little bit further down the line, say, for example, a mortgage that expires next year, and fingers are crossed in the hope that the situation will have alleviated and improved by then. But some people are going to be expiring today or tomorrow or next month. And there ain't much prospect of you rearranging your mortgage in a slightly more advantageous market. So it's a very important conversation. And I can't have it without you. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 10:15 and I'm bang on time. It is 18 minutes after 10. What is going on? And let's just keep it factual and clear. And we'll start with Dan, who's in Nottingham. Dan, what's going on? What made you pick up the phone?
Morning. Well, just to really tell you about our situation.
Yes, thank you.
We've been on an interest-only mortgage for the past few years, which allowed us to borrow money to start our last business. And consequently, there was the CO2 shortage many years ago now, where the cost of CO2, it went from £150 a tonne to £700 a tonne. So we had to shut that business down. We lost 70,000, 80,000 on that. Oof. Thankfully, we still had the interest-only mortgage and it was tracking the bank rate. So we've had a low mortgage, which has allowed us again, to start a catering business up. Fish and chip business, but with the cost of everything, the fish has gone up over 100%.
And the oil and the energy.
Mental, James, absolutely mental. And our mortgage, since the rate started rising in 2021, so we're 14 months into it, our mortgage has gone from £100 a month, because it was interest only, and that's what allowed us to invest, to yesterday I got a letter for last month's rate increase. It's going to be £780, and then tomorrow, because it went up yesterday, that mortgage payment now will be probably £830, £840, if not more.
From 100? From
100, yes.
In 18 months, give or take?
In 18 months, since December 2021, when the rate started rising.
Oh, mate.
I rang Santander, and bear in mind now, this is 2023, and Santander, one of the biggest financial institutions in the world, I said to them, can you give me, I've never missed a payment on my mortgage in 20 years. I said, can we get some sort of payment holiday for the next 5 or 6 months? I said, because I've had to put the house up for sale. The house is on the market because we can't afford it. Yes. Their words to me were, we can give you a payment holiday, but it will knacker your credit rating. She said, apart from that, there is absolutely nothing we can do for you. And when I spoke to them about 4 months ago, the woman on the phone, her words to me were, we can't do anything for you, so just make sure you keep paying that mortgage payment. Those were her words to me over the phone. And the last call, 48 hours ago, That was what I was told. We could give you a short payment holiday, but it will destroy your credit rating. And I said, that's the help you're offering to people in 2023.
So this isn't. I'm so sorry. Is the first thing I'd like to say, and because you've done everything right, and you're a striver, not a skiver, to deploy that disgusting language. Lockdown,
we got
furlough.
nothing through COVID, James.
No,
because of universal credit, we had a limited company. Didn't get 1 penny off this government. We had to rely on our parents helping us. And bear in mind, James, I'm 50 years old.
Yes.
I'm 50 years old. We have worked and grafted, and we work 70 hours a week, 75 hours a week. We had we had a nice 4-bed detached house. We had a nice hot tub in the garden. The hot tub's been switched off for 8 months.
Yes.
We've no enjoyment. I've got lots of injuries and aches and pains like you do at 50.
And you wake up in the middle of the night and wonder how you're going to get through the next chapter.
This is how it is, James, and this is no joke. It's really no joke, and I'm just waiting for that letter to drop through the door next month.
Saying it's gone up to 800 odd pounds a month,
yeah.
And you can't find that money from you just can't. I don't imagine.
No, we've got a small amount of savings left, and I mean small, James. I'm a grafter. I'm a working class lad. And this is where we're up to now.
What are you going to do?
Our catering business is 50% down.
Is it really?
Over the past 7 months, because people haven't got the money.
No, of course not. It's a knock-on effect, isn't it? What are you going to do, Dan? What are you going to do? Do you know?
Do you know what, James? I rack my brains every day and every night thinking, what can we do? Because everything you look at starting in this country, you're knackered before you start. The government have got you before you start.
Yeah. I mean, a combination. It's a pincer movement, really. I understand why you mention the government, but that you're also dealing with the fact that many people listening to this, potential customers of yours, are in similar situations to you, and therefore
they're all in the same. But do you know what, James? In saying that, with the food business and the fish and chip business, you say people have not got money, but you go past any McDonald's or any KFCs, they're all queuing around the block to get in. And these football grounds at the weekend, there's 70,000 sat there, week in, week out at Old Trafford and City, and the money's.
They'll be making their economies in other areas as well. But I'd not thought about the fast food angle on it as well. I mean, they've managed to keep their costs down through economies of scale, presumably, and processing and things like that. Do you actually have a chippy, or do you do mobile catering?
It's mobile catering.
Okay,
and,
so I can't really give you a free advert then, can I?
Well, no, but it's not that, James.
I know. I'd like to. It's a tiny little thing.
Everything.
I know. I understand.
Even with not having an on-site utility bill.
Yeah,
even our gas has gone up £20 a cylinder, and the fish has gone up. People saying the fish has gone up 20-30%. The fish has gone up over 100%.
I've seen that.
9 months.
What? I mean, I hesitate to ask this question, and it will sound a bit glib because I ask it often, and I apologise in advance. But what does the light at the end of the tunnel look like?
There isn't one, James. The light is firmly switched off, and we're all in the dark at the moment because I do not know what to do. And as a 50-year-old guy now, with a lot of aches and pains, back's gone, this is gone, that's gone.
Well, I don't do physical work, mate. I'm a walking dictionary of pain.
Yeah. I just don't know, James.
Well, I can only wish you well. You know that. I'm sorry that I can't do more. I can point out that the Work and Pension Secretary today, who really should be prioritising the plight of people like you, is instead talking utter gibberish about people who've given up work should go back in order to cut tax for everybody else. A story we may get onto a little bit later. It's very odd. And one front page is saying don't call convicts criminals anymore. It upsets them. Or don't call prisoners. You wonder why the people who, the 13 years in charge of cheerleaders, are not talking about people like Dan. 26 after 10 is the time. My phones have gone bonkers. I kind of hope they wouldn't, which is odd. Most mornings I really look forward to it. Some mornings they don't go, they do these days, almost always go bonkers. But back in the day when they didn't go bonkers, I used to have a little bit of a panic. But some days I almost don't want the phones to ring because it means that people like Dan are on the line with stories like his. David's in Epsom. David, what made you pick up the phone?
Morning, James. I think I'll probably treat this call a bit like a counselling session, to be honest. My mortgage is the fixed rate expires at the end of this month.
Right.
up until Wednesday last week, I was signed up for a base rate tracker.
Yes.
I'm quite fortunate. A friend of mine is who looks after remortgaging, etc. So he sort of kept an eye on it and said, look, there's some good deals to fix as it is, which I did. The offer come through at 9 o'clock yesterday morning, luckily. So I managed to fix before that. But even as a result, it's going up by 33%. So we'll go from £1,000 to just over £1,300. I work in a job where it's quite bonus reliant in the construction industry, which I'll probably earn 25% less this year. And don't get me wrong, these are not bonuses like bankers get where they go and buy themselves flash cars. These are bonuses that pay for bills, you know.
Yeah. It's part of your salary. I mean, you factor it in as part of your income, not as some.
It's called a bonus. It's
exactly.
Some people historically have just said, right, pay off the mortgage, but that unfortunately is not the case for most of us who use it to live.
Yes.
And to bring the government into it,
go on.
They want us to be grateful that I've had £66 for the last 5 months to put towards my energy bill. And yet these companies are still making £3 billion profit in 3 months.
And Sunak will mention that every week at PMQs.
Well, my friends will testify, I watch it avidly, but to see him sit there and just say more people employment, blah, 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 it's just a nonsense. If you're in a situation where your mortgage is going up by £300 a month, and you are going to have to rely on savings, which unfortunately come from an inheritance, so it's not even the nice way to come into money.
Of course.
It will just go.
There's a gulf here that I don't remember seeing in the years I've been doing this job. There's always been unfairness, there's always been injustice, but there's a gulf here. Just listening to the first two calls, you and Dan, you are. If I use the word normal, you know what I mean by it, David. You're normal people living normal lives that seem to be utterly detached from the world that's inhabited by the government, or at least the world that the government is legislating for. How they can stand up. And I don't know that Labour would have a master plan to make things any better. I don't know how much politicians can do in situations like this, but the stuff that they're obsessing about, the stuff that they're talking about every day, it's not going to touch the sides of where you and Dan are, is it?
The problem is we've spent these, I've always got the smart Alex saying, you should overpay on your mortgage, blah, blah, blah. We probably have had it easy over the last sort of 3 years.
Maybe.
Or not 3 years. The last 3 have been horrendous, haven't they? But prior
before
to that, with low interest rates. But that's not reality.
You cut your cloth, don't you?
You just for once, you wake up in the morning and say, thanks, God, this year's looking like a nice year. I can actually, treat the family to a bit extra or do whatever. What kind of a life is it where I used to run sort of spreadsheets and all that nonsense run the house, which I understand people have to do.
Yeah, of course.
But there's nothing more demoralising when all you keep doing is just upping everything. And, when you look at how much you used to spend on food, I won't go down that, line, but you just think it's
where can I make the cut next? Where can I save a few quid next? I think you used the word demoralising. That's the right word to use, isn't it? Soul destroying eventually, because everything becomes an exercise in penny pinching.
The light at the end of the tunnel is May next year, when hopefully we see a change of government. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not going to change overnight, but that's
you just have a sense that different people need to be prioritised, and also, of course, I wasn't going to get political, particularly on your call, but you did. It won't be May; it'll be a bit later than that. But still, the small state, small government ideology, vampiric ideology that runs through the current iteration of the Tory party, like Blackpool through a stick of rock, is relevant here, hugely relevant here. Well, what can governments do? Governments shouldn't be getting involved in people. It's the market. If David can't afford his mortgage, if Dan can't afford his mortgage, that's the market. They'll have to sell their house, move somewhere small. I reject that completely. I reject that actually with passion. That's not what a country is about. It's not what a society is about, and it's not what a government is for. However many secretly funded think tanks on Tufton Street may pop up to claim that the market will regulate itself, everything will be okay if you just look after the market. It's just cobblers. It's nonsense. And when I speak to people like that, you, David, and to Dan a moment ago, it actually makes me very, very cross. That vampiric so-called ideology, the ideology that propelled Liz Truss all the way into Downing Street, goes unchallenged so often in our media, up to and including the BBC. Until you demand that governments do more, They won't. 10:31 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines. 10:35 is the time. I have this condition, don't I want to say clever things. It's a bit pathetic. I don't think I'm ever going to grow out of it now. I'm reaching the stage in life where you accept that some of the things are baked in now. I'm being a bit unkind to myself. I don't mean I have an urge to say clever things. I have an urge to help. I want to understand stuff. I want to be able to say, oh, okay, well, at least I know why that's happening, even if it's still awful. And if you know why it's happening, you get a better grasp of how it might, to invent a word, how it might unhappen. And you don't on stuff like this. It's mornings like this where you just sort of wonder quite what is going, or what is the point of news? What is the point of analysts? What is the point of forecasts even? Because people are genuinely seeing their mortgages go up by epic figures, by 600, 700, 800%. You're going up one caller already from £100 a month to £800 and odd a month in the space of less than 2 years. It's insane, and it's widespread. I suspect that because there are 12 months in a year and 5 years or so in a mortgage, it doesn't get the momentum that it would get if everybody was on the same deal. If everybody was coming up against this brick wall now, then I suspect it would be the biggest scandal in the country, wouldn't it? But they're not. It's divided by 12, and then it's divided by, 5 times 365 divided by something. Do you see what I mean? The mortgages are coming to an end at different points. If they were all coming to an end at the same point and everyone was having to renegotiate according to the new interest rates, it would be, I think it would be huge. It would be scandalous. As it is, it's personally scandalous. It's micro scandalous. It's every person ringing the radio station today facing really existential threat to their economic situation or to their home. But because you divide that by 12 and then you divide it by the length of mortgages, it doesn't get the momentum it would need to really push the banner forward. A quick visit to Idiot's Corner. Gordon's in Scotland. He says, how can a millionaire radio presenter sympathise with the working man? It's hypocrisy. It doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, mate. I don't know what's happened to you to make you like that, but I presume you feel sorry for something occasionally. I don't know, a pigeon with a broken wing, maybe? And yet you're not a pigeon with a broken wing. Doesn't make sense. It's hypocrisy. It's called empathy, pal. It's called wanting the best for people. It's called kindness, decency, left wing. 10:38 is the time. Let's go to Lee, who's in Brockham. Lee, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I picked up the phone because I wanted to share our current situation with you. So, on one hand, I think it's important to recognise that we're in a really good position. We're very fortunate. My husband and I both earn well. We've got family support from both sides, and we can survive. Okay. But on the other hand, it's really not ideal. So we have my husband's that we've not been able to sell at the moment, and we also have our family home. We needed to move because we had a child. Yes. The flat of my husband's, it has gone on to the variable rate. It was less than £1,000 before that. It's now £2,000 a month, over £2,000 a month.
When was it less than £1,000? How long ago was it less than £1,000?
It fell onto the standard rate in September, October of last year. The reason,
it's
and
madness,
I think, why didn't we? It's madness, and I think what was so difficult is everywhere we looked, we had no good option. Yeah. We tried desperately to sell the flat. It's probably ideal for a first-time buyer, so there are fewer first-time buyers now that can afford to buy the flat. So we tried for 6 months every single avenue to try and sell it. We did the standard route of sale. We even tried to sell for cash, way below market value. Right. We got near the end of it, and then the buyer said, actually, sorry, we don't think we can sell this. We're not going to buy it from you. Yeah. So we're sort of forced landlords. We've got people in there now. It doesn't cover the mortgage. It gets us some way there, but it doesn't cover it. Meanwhile, we're paying our own mortgage. And
what's the score on the home mortgage? What's the score on the main home mortgage?
You could call it lucky, I suppose, but we got that in just before things went terribly
same
sour.
here. It is luck. It's pure luck.
Just before. And
because if you were getting skinned from both ends, you'd be in, I mean, even with the with the felicitous situation you described with regard to family and earnings, if you were getting skinned from both ends, you'd be in a very different kettle of fish.
Yeah, we absolutely would. And in the meantime, because we bought our family home while we still own the flat because we couldn't sell it, we've paid an extra 20 grand in stamp duty.
Gosh,
so
yes.
we've then got to sell the flat within 3 years to get that back, or within less than 3 years to get it back now. So we can't lock in a fixed mortgage. It would be on a high rate anyway, but even if we did, we're going to pay tens of thousands in penalties to get out of it. So it's sort of every which way you look is just absolutely awful.
So I'm glad you've rung in, and I am, because you are going to be okay unless something goes catastrophically wrong.
But by the skin of our teeth, we will be. Yeah.
But you are also getting rinsed, as it were, by the situation, by the market, or whatever you want to call it, by the absence of government intervention. I mean, I don't know. I think they guarantee, they almost bank on our naivety sometimes, or on our lack of engagement. If you're built a certain way, they're distracting you with small boats or culture wars or whatever it may be. And if you're built a slightly different,
it works.
Yes, of course it works. And if you're built a slightly different way, you think the grown-ups will sort everything out. I'm too busy getting on with it and then suddenly things like this come along, and no one can really make sense of it. It's bizarre. Thank you, though. No, I'm grateful for that, because I know we can talk about first world problems and tiny violins, but that's not the point. That's what our friend in Scotland doesn't understand, is that you can have sympathy for people's situation, even if their situation is better than somebody else whose situation you also have sympathy for. I don't know that this gentleman here, Rich Days in Leeds, understands, well, much really. He says, sorry, but all this interest rises is nonsense. 20 years ago, the rate was 6%. Over the years, I lost out taking fixed rates one after the other as the percentage went down. Now I'm on a 2.7 for another 6.5 years. However, stop whining. It's called the market, and take it into the consideration when you take out a mortgage. Rates may rise. I took the rough deal with it. That's from Rich, who I don't think is in danger of choking on the milk of human kindness anytime soon, unfortunately. But, that is the voice of the... I don't know quite what it is, the voice of the gristle-headed ogre or the Muppet of the month. But there will always be that. There will always be people saying, well, no, you can't expect that. I didn't get any help in my day. Lisa is in Newcastle on Tyne. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Good morning. Thanks for listening to me.
You're welcome.
I'm a renter. Well, yes. Hopefully you'll listen to me.
Of course.
I'm a renter. Previously, I bought a property when mortgage companies were throwing money at you and offering whatever you wanted. And I had to give back the property because I had family bereavements where I couldn't work.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And the value was far less than what I could sell it for. So I lost my property, and I've been renting for the last 6.5 years. On top of that, I've always had high-paying professional jobs. Right. And last June, I got made redundant because our company lost its European market because of Brexit.
Yeah.
My son bought a property, and I was able to help him with the redundancy I got. His first property, and everything was great. And then at the beginning of this year, the landlady said because of the interest rate rises, she didn't know what she was going to do because she couldn't really afford it. She then told me that she was extending it, and that was all great. I was really happy that I had somewhere to live. At the end of March, I got completely out of the blue, made redundant from my new job that I started in September.
Oof.
And on the 30th of March, I got notice on my property to say I can't afford not to move back in. So I have 2 months to vacate. I have no job, so I can't rent, and I have 2 dogs. So I can't rent because nobody will rent anywhere. And I'm literally, I have no idea what to do. And I don't think people actually understand the real world. We're not people who waste money. I had a great credit rating, and I can't pay my bills. So I've got a bad credit rating now. And it just gets too much sometimes. And I also have heart disease, which is awful. It sounds. I mean, I look quite normal, but
Sure.
I also have heart disease, so I would be deemed a vulnerable person. And there's nothing out there. There's no help at all. The council just say, "Oh, well, if you're homeless, let us know when you're homeless, and we'll see if we can help you." So basically, I'm moving with my son, which is unfair.
Yeah.
Or I
It's not
sleep in the
unfair.
car.
It's not unfair.
Well,
I
it
don't
is
know.
because
no,
he actually was with his girlfriend, and I
I
do
know why you
understand that.
say that, and I know why you feel like that, but it's not. There was a caller yesterday when Sadiq Khan was in the studio, and did you hear that? And he just casually said, and of course I had to stay out of work for 13 years to care for my mother and my grandmother, and he said, because I'm Somalian, and I didn't quite understand what he meant by that, but Sadiq of course did, and he said that's part of their religion. It's a religious requirement for Muslims. It doesn't mean every Muslim's going to observe it, but that's why I don't like you saying that it's not fair for you to stay with your son.
Yeah, but
it's not ideal.
Where do I go?
It's not ideal.
No,
Lisa.
it's not ideal.
Yes.
And I just feel I'm 59, and I just think, what was the point? Of trying to contribute to society and try, to help people. I worked in medical law, so I helped people with that. I worked in debt law, so I advised people who were in my position. But there's nothing out there for any help at all. So,
well, that's the point.
Story.
The point is that you have helped people. So, albeit that you haven't got what you should have to show for it at the end, in the social capital, in the differences you've made, you've done jobs and you've helped your son get himself set up in a way that will, continue to be relevant for years to come. But I'm so sorry for what you. I mean, and the most basic thing for peace of mind and security would simply to know that the roof over your head was sound, whether you bought it yourself or whether you were renting it from a landlady who now can't afford to pay her mortgage.
And she's offered to sell it to me.
Sure.
Obviously, I can't get a mortgage at my age. My son is very unlikely to be able to get a mortgage on a second property within a year.
Yeah.
And then there's a deposit fine. So it's a vicious cycle, and every night I go to bed worrying about it, and every morning I wake up worrying about it. So,
I know.
but
I'm sure. And you're not alone. And yet, if everybody was coming up against what you're coming up against at exactly the same time, there would be no other story in town. I know it's not helpful for me to keep saying that, but I think it's important. Lisa, take care. This is why I said to you half an hour ago, I wish my phone lines weren't ringing off the hook, because they're important conversations, these, but they're not easy ones. 10:52 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I think we're pretty clearly looking at something apocalyptic for huge numbers of people. Don't take my word for it. You read a headline like this: millions to pay £10,200 more for their mortgages. And the key word is actually millions. It's not the numbers. The numbers are shocking, but if it was just happening to a few people, then you could understand why it doesn't necessarily attract the attention that it should or would. But when it's happening to millions of people, and my switchboard this morning would completely attest to that. But I don't know, the fact that it doesn't come up. When I say mortgages last for 5 years, I know obviously I've got a mortgage. They don't last for 5 years. They last for 30 years or 25 years. But you often have to reset, don't you? You have to reset your interest rates. And so that is the point at which the problem starts. The mortgage doesn't come to an end. It just needs to be recalibrated to accommodate changes in interest rates. And if everyone was coming to the end of the current arrangement at the same time, or indeed if everyone was on a variable, then there'd probably be protests on the streets, wouldn't there? I think there would. I don't know. Might talk about that next, actually. Why aren't there more protests on the streets? And what do we think of these odd new laws brought in to prevent people from walking slowly down high streets? This is why we do it. Mark in Norwich says, "Thank you, James. It's a pretty depressing hour of radio, but at least I know I'm not alone. That your show is brilliant. You're very kind, mate." It's all down to the listeners. David's in Doncaster. David, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I'm suddenly waking up to realising there's lots more people in a similar position that I've been in for the last 16 years, along with 200,000 others in the same boat. I'm in the unenviable position of being what you class as a mortgage prisoner.
I've heard. Yes. Okay.
if you know anything about
Well,
that.
you explain it, because I'll make a mess of it.
Okay. My mortgage was originally with the Northern Rock. When they went bust in the financial crash, the government took on the mortgages.
Yeah.
Several years further down the line, George Osborne sold them off to an unregulated lender called, it was different names over the years, keep changing the names.
Cerberus at one point.
So they are Cerberus, that's correct.
Yes.
But they encompass quite a number of different
well, it's a private equity
companies.
group. It's an American private equity group which holds mortgages bought from Northern Rock through its Landmark brand, and then you've got Topaz Finance Limited.
Yeah, and Helidor as well.
Yeah.
And some
So what is your plight in terms?
Well, I've been trapped with the Landmark mortgages for the last 16 years, and I've been paying way over the odds on the standard variable rate, which is set by Landmark Mortgages. They tell us they cannot offer any products whatsoever because they're an inactive lender, and tell us our mortgages aren't based on the Bank of England base rate, but they track the Bank of England base rate. So as soon as the interest rate goes up, our mortgage rates go up, and they've gone up every month for the last 12 months or so, 14 months. So they've more than doubled. So I'm expecting a letter any day now to say my interest rate's going to be around 9%.
And where does the imprisonment element of it come from?
Well, we can't move because the lending criteria has changed.
Right.
A lot of mortgage prisoners, we took out our higher mortgages.
So you would be essentially trying to get a mortgage from scratch in a market where the mortgages you got don't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Luckily, I'm one of the few mortgage prisoners that's not entirely on interest only.
Right.
That's what they were sold. And mine, I had to take out an emergency loan back when Northern Rock were around to take a 100% mortgage, basically.
Yes.
And then the house market crashed and in negative equity. So it took quite a number of years to get out of negative equity. And then life changes.
Of course it does.
Divorce proceedings, and then passing of my late wife there as well. Means I'm a single parent.
Yes.
Obviously now fail a lot of the affordability checks.
Yeah, that's what I meant by the status quo changing.
Yeah, although I've been paying more than a lot more than the average person. But
it's insane. I'm getting sent quite a few messages from mortgage prisoners, but I'm glad everyone listening now has a better understanding of what it is. And forgive the stupidity of this question. Why can't you sell up and... Oh, because you wouldn't get a mortgage on the new place.
I wouldn't get a mortgage elsewhere. I was in the process of selling up as part of the divorce proceedings, and then my wife or ex-wife passed away during the process, and then the children moved in with me. And so there was no way I could afford to buy, a 3-bedroom house elsewhere based on the single income that I'd got. One of the children's disabled as well, so you need special care. So I cannot even work, full-time in an office sort of thing. I have to kind of...
You've got to be available. You've got to be around. Well, you know what question I'm going to ask you, and I ask it with a very heavy heart. What does the light at the end of the tunnel look like for you?
Well, luckily, I'm saying luckily. I don't think it's fair. I mean, you mentioned that before in the previous call. Yeah. I'm going to have to use my pension. I had a good pension from my previous employment to pay off my mortgage when it comes to an end. But why should I?
Lucky in the sense that you've got it. It's a bit like it being good news that the Bank of England doesn't think there's going to be a recession anymore. It's only good news compared to where we were 10 minutes ago or 10 days ago. You're lucky because you've got this option, and that means you're in a much better position than you would be if you didn't have this option. But it's not an option you should be having to take or rely on.
And on that, I'm saying that as well. Trusteenomics wiped a massive amount off my pension, just like a lot of other people's pensions at the time, which will take years to recover.
Yeah, I mean, why do you think there's not more of a momentum behind the big picture, which involves everybody who's currently getting rinsed, and the smaller picture, which involves the 200,000 people in your position? You must feel very ignored.
We have done over the years, and we've been banging our heads against a brick wall trying to get our messages across, and a lot of the time we get labelled as risky lenders. Yeah, which in some cases it is the
I got 110% off the Northern Rock back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the cards just fell a bit differently. Our world turned differently. I could easily have been where you are, and I'm not through much more through luck than judgment. The idea of getting a 100 to 10% mortgage with no deposit now is ridiculous. It doesn't make you dodgy or irresponsible or anything.
No. I know Martin Lewis has done quite a lot of work to help us.
If there are any certainties in this world, it's that Martin Lewis would have done his absolute best to come to the rescue of people like you.
And he's a superstar and working quite closely, and he's even sent recommendations to the government. Yeah. And all we get back is they're looking at it, they're looking at it, and they're looking at it. It's gone through to the Lords. It gets blocked at the Lords with any recommendations that they make.
Yes,
it's the same Lords every time.
And he won't give up, and you have no choice but to keep the fight. But I know Martin very well, and I know that he's motivated by this. I mean, it's like our friend in Scotland, Gordon, who doesn't understand how someone who's rich can feel sorry for people who are struggling. Martin Lewis is motivated by a pure sense of justice. I've never met anyone quite like him, actually. Certainly not in the world of politics, but not quite like him. There are good people in politics, but he does it out of he's almost like a knight of the round table, who will not rest while these sort of injustices unfold, regardless of how comfortable he is personally. And it has been suggested that if I'm putting someone from Scotland in Idiot's Corner, I should call it Egypt's Corner, just to make it more pressing. David, I'm sorry, mate, and we will be more aware of mortgage prisoners whenever we return to the territory that's under discussion today. And I would also remind you, actually, mentioning politics, the large bulk of Rishi Sunak's fortune was made during the financial crisis, during the global financial crisis, which saw Northern Rock go under. And yet at PMQs he still tries to somehow claim it was a consequence of Gordon Brown's economic policies. That's a blatant lie. He knows it. He knows it because he was across the facts enough to make hundreds of millions of pounds out of other people's misery during the global financial crisis. And that's your Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. Can we go meta? Do you want to go meta? Not the weird virtual reality Mark Zuckerberg thing. Can we go meta on a story? It doesn't always work, but when it works, it can be a thing of beauty. I want to know why you don't ring me about something as much as you do about other things. So, in other words, I want to know why we don't care more about something that some people care very passionately about, but not as many people as should. George Monbiot, who's very much a force for good, has written an article today in the Guardian newspaper, I think it's in the Guardian, saying the coronation arrests are just the start. Police can do what they want to us now. And this is pretty evidence-based. This is a pretty factual, it's an opinion piece, but the evidence he cites in defence of his position is close to unequivocal. The premise it builds on is an opinion. It's a historically sound opinion, but not a scientific one. He says the more unequal a society becomes, the more oppressive its laws must be. And I wasn't going to do this topic today, but oddly, talking in the last hour and wondering out loud why we're not pushing back harder again. I mean, think about this just for a minute. Here's a nutshell for you. They don't come along as often as I wish. I love nutshells. I love penny drop moments. I love the little things that clarify and crystallise big and complicated issues. The United Kingdom's Prime Minister is a man who made his money, who made his fortune, who made hundreds of millions of pounds by essentially betting on the global financial crisis, right? He saw that as an opportunity, while people like Gordon Brown saw it as an unmitigated disaster. Not only that, of course, but as Gordon Brown was going to work trying to repair the situation or improve the situation, Rishi Sunak was filling his boots. And he is now Prime Minister, lying about the roots of the global financial crisis, somehow being Labour Party policies at the time. That's really important when it comes to understanding the mess that we're in. Regardless of your party politics, regardless of how you voted in the Brexit referendum. That's really important. Someone who made hundreds of millions of pounds out of the global financial crisis lies about what caused the global financial crisis and presides over a country where inequality is getting worse and worse and laws are becoming more oppressive. That's not an opinion. That's counting. That is what is happening. The laws are getting more oppressive. Inequality is getting worse. And the man currently in charge made a ton of money out of the global financial crisis, from which this country in particular, as a consequence of austerity policies imposed by his party, has still not recovered as well as it might have done, as well as other countries have done. So the question of why aren't we pushing back harder against things is doubly interesting. Number one, because even if we tried to, we probably couldn't, but I don't think that's an answer to the question. And number two, because we are, bread and circuses? What is it? Panem et circia? The thing, as long as the Romans give the people bread and circuses, they won't rise up against the epic inequality that they suffer. So you will be aware of some of these stories. 2:00 on the morning of the coronation, the Metropolitan Police is a story that was broken by a journalist called Mick Wright, who we've spoken to on the programme in recent weeks. 3 people in Soho were arrested for carrying rape alarms. They were part of the emergency Night Stars group, which helps to stop the sexual harassment of women. The police claimed they were acting on intelligence that rape alarms might be used to frighten the horses that would later be parading elsewhere. That intelligence seems to have come from the front page of the Mail on Sunday without any apparent reason to link it to the 3 volunteers working for Westminster City Council as Night Stars being implicated in that reported intention. They give rape alarms to women who might need them. The alarms are funded by the Home Office. The volunteers wear pink tabards emblazoned with the logo of their partner organisation, which is the Metropolitan Police. Yet 3 volunteers arrested, cuffed, 3 hours, handcuffs for 3 hours, custody for 14 hours before being released on bail. And speaking of the evidence or the intelligence, the Mail hasn't produced any evidence at all that environmental or Republican activists were planning to do such a thing with rape alarms, but they did enough, quotes, journalism, end quotes, to make being in possession of a rape alarm, even if you were a volunteer working to help women avoid sexual harassment on the streets of London in the small hours of the morning, being in possession of a rape alarm was grounds for arrest in Brexit Britain, in Rishi Sunak's Britain. And if it wasn't for the patience of Mick Wright, that story probably wouldn't have seen the light of day. We spoke to Alistair Morgan yesterday, whose brother Daniel's murder remains the most investigated in British history and will never be solved, in large part because of collusion between media and police. The head of media at the Metropolitan Police is a former crime reporter at the Daily Mail. These things matter, but they don't matter enough. They matter to some people enormously, but they don't matter to others at all. And we saw yesterday that if you walk slowly up a street in London and therefore slow down traffic, then you will be arrested. You will be carted away. You will be locked up. We've seen a vicar recently locked up for protesting against climate crisis. So a vicar who is on a mission, he believes, to save humanity, now gets arrested, now gets locked up. It is an incredible expansion of suspicion-free stop and search. So you know the damage that has done to relations between communities, particularly between police and the black community. But this government has decided that stopping people and searching them without any suspicion or grounds whatsoever needs to be enhanced and improved and increased. If someone reasonably believes that a protest might happen somewhere nearby your current location, you can be stopped and searched. A royal superfan was locked up for hours as a consequence of being in the proximity of some of the protesters, some of the environmental protesters who were using the opportunity of the coronation to get their message across. Her name is Alice Chambers, I beg your pardon. She travelled to the Mall in the hope of catching a glimpse of King Charles, and she was arrested and handcuffed. She's an architect from Australia, lived in London for 7 years. For good or for ill, she describes herself as a royal super fan. She was arrested on suspicion of potential to cause a breach of a peace for the offence of being near people who may have been planning a breach of the peace. The quotes are ridiculous. I was just sitting on my little stool and I noticed that there was some yelling, and then some police swooped in and they were pushing the crowd back. I must have been right on the edge of that. I went to get up and 2 police officers just grabbed me and handcuffed me. I don't think they said anything. I think they arrested me before they asked a question. I felt like once I was in the system, they didn't listen. I tried to explain that I wasn't part of the group. Of course, this doesn't mean that the group should have been arrested either. It's just a reminder of what happens when the thin end of the wedge starts getting fatter. 13 hours. questioned repeatedly, physically searched, held in a cell, DNA samples taken, fingerprints taken, mugshot photos taken, before the Met finally realised she was an innocent bystander. You got nothing to hide, you got nothing to fear. Remember that? It was 7 p.m, 10 hours after she was arrested, before two senior officers acknowledged that they'd made a mistake. And do you know what they even asked her? Why were you on the Mall? I can't think why. Any ideas, anyone? Anyone why someone would be on the Mall last Saturday morning? I got nothing. I don't know. Was there an open-top bus with Kidderminster Harriers? No, that can't happen until we beat Brackley on Sunday. There won't be an open-top bus going up and down the Mall with the Kidderminster Harriers team on it. Don't jinx it, James. Don't jinx it. Come on, you Reds. Any ideas why someone might have been on the Mall the small hours of Saturday morning? No, me neither. And of course, she has found it incredibly harrowing. 64 people arrested around the coronation. We know that 6 of them came from a group that had been liaising with the Metropolitan Police to ensure that they wouldn't be arrested, to offer up assurances that they'd be peaceful. They were supposedly arrested for being in possession of lock-on devices, which could include a cable tie or possibly a dressing gown cord. Anything you could use to tie yourself to another person would somehow render you ripe for arrest in Suella Braverman's Brave New World. I use that phrase advisedly. I've read my Huxley. So, and to add cherry to icing to cake, the Met's Chief Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, later defended his officer's actions. And the Mayor of London here yesterday was not unduly troubled, I don't think. Maybe that's not a little bit fair. You can listen back to what Sadiq Khan had to say about it. Unhappy about some elements of it, but not to the point of condemning the current Met Chief Commissioner for defending his officer's actions, claiming police had received intelligence that protesters were intending to throw paint at the procession and vandalise monuments, which means when they found the paint, it would have been all over the front pages of the newspapers. They didn't find any paint. So there's two stories there. The Eye paper, to give them credit, got an exclusive on the incarceration of a 36-year-old architect who was in the Mall in the hope of catching a glimpse of King Charles on the day of his coronation. And Mick Wright, picked up by George Monbiot in The Guardian today and elsewhere, reporting upon tabard-wearing, volunteers in possession of rape alarms being locked up, it would seem, as a consequence of a complete flyer on the front page of the Mail on Sunday 2 weeks ago. Breathtaking, really. So here's the thing, right? I care. I won't lie to you. I don't know that I care quite enough. It reminds me of conversations about the environment in general, actually, this topic that I'm now teeing up for you to contribute to. I have a form of cognitive dissonance going on. I know it's massively important, crucially important. The right of peaceful protest is absolutely enshrined. I know also that it goes up to the Home Secretary, and touch wood, if we don't have a Tory Home Secretary this time next year or the year after, then these powers will not be exercised, but they may still be in place. They may still be in place, and that means they can be exercised the next time the Tories get back in again. I think Labour will reform, but I can't prove that or guarantee that. The problem I've got is, I think, and I'm going to use this in a very unscientific way. I mentioned to the producer this morning that I wanted to talk about this, and we both acknowledged it doesn't sing as a story. It doesn't make the phones ring off the hook. And that doesn't matter to me, as you know, as my arrogance has grown with every passing year behind this microphone. Some of my favourite conversations are the ones where only 4 people have rung in, but they've all got a story to tell of such epic power and profundity that we will never forget those calls. And then on other days, you've got 100 people trying to get into a slot where there's only room for 6 or 1,000. Actually, it's as you know, it's the most popular talk show now on the whole of commercial radio, and there's a reason for that, and that reason is you, with a little bit of me. It's 52-48, I think, isn't it? It's the infernal ratio. But this one doesn't float your boat. It doesn't. The environment one does. I can fill up the switchboard with people who are passionately comprehending of the problem. But this doesn't. It doesn't. And even today, when I tell you about a completely innocent woman, she's eccentric enough for you not to think there, but for the grace of God, go I, maybe. This is the question I'm going to ask you. Why don't we care more? 0345 6060 973, which means there's an invitation for you here. There's a red carpet for you here if you do care more, because you might have a better handle on why we don't than we do. I care, but not enough. I don't care at all. I care a hell of a lot, but there's nothing I can do. There are a million different answers to this question. But if you sat in isolation, it's the Benjamin Franklin line, which is slightly misattributed because he was talking more about taxes than civil liberties. But when he talks about you being prepared to surrender your liberties in return for some temporary security, then you deserve neither liberty nor security. These are epic philosophical principles that run through human history, like the Thames runs through London. And yet when they are under threat and when they are under attack and when they are gone, we don't care enough. And although I'm part of the problem, I think I'm still allowed to ask why. Why don't we care more about this stuff? So look into your soul and ask yourself why you don't care more about the fact that you could be arrested and locked up for being in the wrong place at the right time, or the right place at the wrong time. Or in the case, I think, of Alice Chambers, in the right place at the right time. You're a flag-waving royalist who wants to catch a glimpse of King Charles, and before your feet have touched the ground, you're in a police cell with handcuffs on for 3 hours. That's what she's done. That's what Suella Braverman has done. That's what the Tories have done. They've waved it through. And it's huge, you know? That line, the more unequal a society becomes, the more oppressive its laws must be. We just spent an hour examining the inequality-based mortgage apocalypse. I said to you, why don't we get on the streets? Why aren't more people protesting? Why aren't more people protesting? And I don't know. It's the answer. But part of it might be we don't care enough about the power of protest. We don't think protest works. And therefore, the police having powers to shut down peaceful protest don't really bother us because we don't have enough respect for the protest. I'm going to stop providing my answers. I'm going to open up the phone lines for you to provide yours. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Our right to peaceful protest has already been filleted, and there is not much that you might describe as a palpable sense of public anger. Why not? Think about it. Why not? Why don't you care more? And if you think you do care enough, why do others not care more? And if you want to, I'd love to hear why you don't think we should care at all. 0345 6060 973. 24 minutes after 11. It's such an obvious, it's one of the things you get taught. It's one of the things you take as a given. It's a presumptive, a right to protest. I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And then along come some environmental protesters slowing a bit of traffic in central London, and we're throwing all of our... Why don't we care more about this bill, about these powers, about these erosions? Sean's in Watford. Sean, what do you reckon?
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, London.
Do you know, I wasn't going to say first time caller, but now I have.
I think you have to now, don't you?
Yeah,
you have to
exactly.
To explain your loss of the ability to speak English.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Go on.
My view is really it's a case of people tend to only be concerned about something when it affects them. It's as simple as that. So, a silly example I gave to the receptionist person.
No, producer, please, Sean.
Producer, sorry,
let's carry on.
Yes,
That's
producer, yeah.
Yes.
Is that, for example, the train strikes? I think they've got their right to strike. That's not a problem. But I support Man City, and the FA Cup's on Saturday, and it now concerns me that they're striking on that day.
Yeah.
I'm now going, why are you doing it? Because you're disrupting everything. You know.
I do, and yet. So you could be in favour of the right to disrupt until it's you being disrupted, and of course there'll be plenty of people who absorb that, and you're not going to move from a 100% support to 100% opposed, but it just becomes a bit more pertinent. So you need to. Well, that's why I thought the case of the superfan Alice Chambers was so interesting, because that should be quite a big there but for the grace of God scenario. Yeah. But I don't know that enough people are going to hear about it, to be honest, to make that difference. So you need to imagine something you really care about, imagine wanting to protest about it, and then imagine getting handcuffed and locked up as a consequence.
That's it. But again, it's just one of those situations where a lot of, as you've said, and plenty of times on your radio show, it's people might want to jump up in arms about this, that, and the other, and the mail readers and everything else. And yet, when something affects them, that's when they go, "Oh, well, that's not right. This isn't right. Why are they allowed to do this, that, and the other?" And I think people sometimes can change only when it affects them.
So you've got to find something that you care, something that you care about enough, and then you should care enough about protest, but you can't quite knit it together. And then what about the people who do care? I mean, I suppose at the moment, George Monbiot, writing very powerfully today, is a huge environmental campaigner, and it is at the moment Just Stop Oil protesters and Extinction Rebellion protesters who seem to be the original target of the legislation. So you've got to care. Maybe it's chicken and egg. You've got to care about the thing they're protesting about in order to care about the attack upon protest.
Can I just another thing that I did notice last week? It really annoyed me on the TV in the morning.
Oh yeah,
they were talking about the bill and everything else, and saying about peaceful protesting, and then they were showing these people that were just standing there saying "not my king" and everything else fine. Then they cut to the Stop Oil people.
Yeah.
And I just thought, no, that's two different things there. Some people, if they're doing something, let's say criminal or hurting or stopping traffic and all of that, the police can get involved so people are not a danger to themselves and to other people. Whereas just standing saying, "not my king," I think, why are they putting the two together? So it's as if it's like the subliminal. This is what it's for.
I've got an answer for you. Here's a text that came in. Thank you, Sean. People are bored now with all the tree-hugging, great anti-washed trust fund protesters. We can't even, as a country, put on a coronation without worrying about protesters. So this is what medieval feudalism sounds like. This is rich man in his castle, poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. Tug forelock, doff cap. Yes, the government are rubbish, but let's have it right. Labour will get in next time due to this Tory government destroying itself, but the protesters are boring and they should be rightly put back in their box. No, I can't read the rest of it. But, the great question of British politics since 2016 is just how many gibbering idiots are there out there who can just about muster up enough intelligence to put a cross in a box. And my inbox daily provides evidence that there are more than we ever realised. Stephanie's in Port Talbot in Wales. Stephanie, what would you like to say? Why don't we care more?
Hi, I'd like to say I think we do care.
Well, that fella doesn't. The one I just read out, but let's park him in Idiot's Corner and carry on with your call.
The less I say about that, the better, I think. But we do care. I'm a young person. We kind of famously will kick off at anything we will. Yes. But basically, I think the biggest issue is that we're in the face of such an oppressive government, and now recently I've been really disappointed in the way the police are reacting as well, that people are facing a choice of whether they want to kind of face up to that. Are they at risk of being kind of being battered by the police or whatever? The cost of living crisis are kind of enhancing that. Am I going to lose my job if I speak up about this? Am I going to, all this kind of thing, even down to the practicalities of taking action in your care. So I would have been at the Grand National protest. I know for a fact I would have been, but I couldn't get there because it was so far away, or you can't afford the day off work, or you can't afford petrol. Yeah. But people so do passionately care, and it annoys me when you get a texter like that saying, "Oh, why can't we put on a coronation?"
Well, what about a texter like this? Just listen to this from Betty in Pickering. She says, "They've won, James. The young, concerned citizens are frightened of getting a criminal record that might affect their future careers. I didn't give Arrest a second thought when I marched against the poll tax, for the NHS, against the war, but now the government will be governed by an increase or controlled by an increasingly small echo chamber."
I think the issue is, and I don't know about that person who's text, but people who say that, "Oh, why are you worried about a criminal record? Why are you worried about your career?" You're in a place of privilege to be able to say that. There are some people and some young people who can't afford their mortgage, who can't afford their rent. So, they have a responsibility to think about those things. It's so kind of conceited and privileged to be able to say, "I don't have to care about my criminal record." I'm glad that they don't, but the people that do, and we're not all in a position to be able to do that.
ultimately, protesters will risk their own lives, won't they? That's
well, we know about the suffragettes.
Yeah, you've got the suffragettes, but you've got anti-apartheid protesters as well. You've got, history is punctuated with people who prioritised their principles ahead of their own lives. So if you put that at the extremity of what you are prepared, this is what Maria Ressa said to me, the Filipina journalist who's won the Nobel Peace Prize and lives in constant threat of incarceration by the government in the Philippines. She says, what are you prepared to give up to protect or to fight for what you care for? And that's your point, I think, or that's part of your point, is that you are lucky if you've got things to give up, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to give them up.
Yeah, definitely. And, this isn't to take away from the people that do give their lives in protest. Those people are absolutely fantastic. But it's not always an option for people to be in those situations.
And you forget, you could say, how do you articulate the fact that you care? That's a great point as well, Stephanie. How do you articulate the fact that you care passionately? Not necessarily, or not only about the issue that's being protested. You care passionately about the fact that these powers that the police have been given are hideous. If that's too strong, too emotive a word, then oppressive or too strong. Where do you go with your anger? Where do you go with it? So, I'm sitting here thinking of people, because my phones don't ring. This is one of the places you can go, but I've not asked the question this way round before. So where do you go with it? Most of the media is not going to go near you. You go public with it, you're going to get locked up. Where do you go with your protest against the attack on the right to protest? Good God, that sounds Kafkaesque, doesn't it? It's 11:32. Thomas Watts has your headlines. 11:36 is the time. Why don't we care more? Why don't we care more about the assault upon our right to protest? Leo is in Uxbridge. Leo, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Thanks for taking my call. First time caller.
Welcome.
So, how are you doing with me? I just think that we don't care so much because we're exhausted.
Yeah.
We're exhausted. There's only so much frustration and anger that we can exude, and we're almost spent. And when you're protesting and your protests are falling on deaf ears, and not even the media, if the media is not interested in your case and your cause and are shutting you down and not listening to you, and you're frustrated with that, and every morning you're furious that you're not getting any airtime.
It's only the Extinction Rebellion and the Just Stop Oil people have never had more coverage than they've had in the last couple of years. I'm
not talking about Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion.
We're talking about the people. Hang on, mate. Just to be clear, we're talking about the people whose protests have recently been broken up by the police using these new powers. So we probably.
I understand that.
So
I understand
you can add
that,
some. You can add a group to that list if you want, but they have to be victims of the Public Order Act.
Yeah, but my point is that when we're being shut down anyway, our protest, I'm a anti-ULEZ protester.
Okay.
We don't get any airtime from you guys.
You get
when we get shut
Ferrari
down,
does it every day.
I'm talking about you, James, not Ferrari.
Don't worry about me. I find it boring.
I know you do, and that's the problem.
But I'm doing a phone in, and Nick doesn't. Nick loves it. So you can ring Nick whenever you want.
It's a parking ticket. I don't know how desperate people have to be, and how many suicides need to occur.
I did it literally yesterday.
You open your eyes, James.
I did it literally yesterday on the show.
You gave him one question, and you let him spill his lies about 4,000 deaths that aren't real lives.
He didn't mention that. What do you mean they're not real lives? I think I know why you're. I know why you're struggling.
It's statistical projection.
Okay. I think I know why you're struggling to get traction.
The real people are the ones being affected by it.
I think I know why you're struggling to get traction.
It's because I'm emotional.
No, it's because you're quite overbearing and a little bit obnoxious.
James, only because you won't listen, you won't give us any airtime.
I have listened, and the radio station gives loads of airtime to ULEZ, and you're talking about me. You're not talking about the issue, and that's just weird and a bit obnoxious.
I'm trying to get the point across that the reason that we're not cared, we don't.
But you're not talking about the phone-in that we're having.
Shutting down. The reason I'm we don't get vocal about the shutting down of protesting, it's because our protesting falls on deaf ears anyway.
Yeah, but we're not talking about you today. And that's part of the reason why you're struggling to get traction, is that you think everybody... Oh, you should see my inbox. I get messages. I mute them, obviously, but I get messages from people about you, Les, 10, 20, 30 times a day. Now, look at the number. It's always the same number. That's that's a recipe for being ignored.
It's me.
God, this is like the end of that Eminem song. This is like the end of the Eminem... Well, stop it now. Because if it is you, then I muted you about 6 months ago.
I know you did.
So look at all the energy you've wasted.
Well, because sometimes, James, you say the line, "Oh, it took me a while to come around, and then I realised the devastation this is going to cause for hundreds of thousands of the poorest people in our community."
But that's not the topic.
When are you going to get to that point, James?
Well, let's wait and see.
When are you going to get to that point?
Let's wait and see.
I hope there's no suicides before you get to that point, James.
Well, obviously, if there are suicides, my heart will break. But there's not a lot I can do to prevent them. And if you're serious about trying to prevent them, then stop obsessing about a radio presenter and get out there and protest. And if the police come down on you like a ton of bricks, I'll have your back, mate, because that's what I do, and that's what I'm trying to do today. But you've sought to disrupt and distract from the central issue with your own grievance, which is your prerogative, but it's also why I muted you. Have a great weekend. Adam's in Darlington. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello.
Long-time fan, first-time caller.
Welcome aboard.
Well, thank you, sir. Right, I wanted to phone up the media to talk about media complicity in what people care about.
Yes.
Because I was watching Question Time last night. Because I've got an equal crush on Ash Sarkar and Nick Ferrari. Don't tell it.
That's quite... Was Nick on it last night?
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Ash Sarkar. I've seen some clips of her from last night, and I think if she was on Imagine if she'd been on Question Time as often as Nigel Farage was. The country would be in a very, very different place. And
I see.
I might accept the invitation to go on it myself if I thought she was going to be sitting next to me. But what did you ring in to say?
They won't have you back on the BBC.
No, I got invited on it last week, mate. I can't. I'd love to pretend that they have some sort of fence up to keep out people like me, but no, I do routinely get invited on it. The problem, I can't tell the last fella off for talking about me too much and then going off on a quick examination of the reasons why I don't go on Question Time. So, what did you ring in to say?
Well, because last night they had maybe 4 or 5 questions, and none of them, given how it's all been pushed at us, shall we say, rather than shoved down our throats, the whole coronation thing, there wasn't a single question about the right to protest and about what happened with the police and the rape alarm protesters in several the rape alarm ladies. And
I don't know enough about the editorial process to know when it's a conspiracy or not even. It's never a conspiracy. But what did they ask questions about? I saw the questions about sewage and water.
Yes, which is that's a thing. That's a legitimate thing.
But no one has sat there. There hasn't been a meeting. I honestly don't think, Adam, that there's been a meeting and they've said, let's not have a question about the protest. Where was it filmed?
Well, Bexhill-on-Sea.
Well, then your audience is possibly not prioritising the Public Order Act in the way that you are, or in the way that another constituency might. I don't know.
Yeah, that's legit. But here's the thing, man. The very last question. Now, I love Eurovision, and I was actually moved to tears last night.
You're covering a lot of ground. Go on.
Sorry, but I do love Eurovision. And I was moved to tears by the semi-final last night, by the thing. But why was the last question was about Eurovision? Literally, they've got Ash Sarkar.
They always do a funny one at the end of...
Yeah, they even have a nickname for it and stuff, and fair enough. But really, that was an hour-long programme. They go, right, we've got to do the water, we've got to do the immigrants, we've got to do the kicking at the local election.
I don't know if this is media complicity. I appreciate that you appreciate the irony. In fact, this is going to be a bit of a mouthful. I appreciate that you appreciate the irony because you acknowledged at the beginning that you were phoning up the media to complain about media complicity in the failure to cover the topic that we're covering. God, blimey, try saying that without putting your teeth in first. But I mean, certainly the coverage that they get is almost uniformly negative. You know, the protests, the coverage is always negative. The anti-monarchy protesters, the coverage was always negative. But the coverage, the failure perhaps to cover the attack upon the right to protest is it maybe is being ignored by the media, by most of the media, by the rest of the media, but it's not. I don't think it failed to pop up on Question Time as a result of a conscious decision-making process. If someone had submitted a zinger of a question, I'm going to get a call now, aren't I, from someone in Bexhill-on-Sea and say, actually, James, I submitted a zinger of a question on this precise topic last night, and my question was not read out by Fiona Bruce. But I could be wrong. Thank you. It is 11:45. It's 11:49. I wonder whether our friend in Uxbridge, Leo, was unintentionally more helpful than I realised. Because I called him, what did I call him? Obnoxious, and what was the other word? Began with O. I can't remember. And I find some of the ULEZ protesters are sort of in this 20-minute city World Economic Forum vaccine skepticism adjacent, and they're very odd and very aggressive, and therefore I generally try to avoid them. But at the end of that exchange, I said, if you protest and you get treated like the anti-monarchy protesters are treated, or you get treated like the Westminster Night Stars were treated in the context of the coronation, or you get treated like some of the environmental protesters have been, then I've got your back. Because your right to protest is absolutely sacrosanct. But I wonder whether some people find the protesters obnoxious, like the anti-monarchy protesters or the Just Stop Oil or the Extinction Rebellion, and therefore don't care about the assault upon their right to protest. So you're basing your attitude to the right to protest on specific that's really dangerous. So even though I found our friend in Uxbridge, was it overbearing and a bit obnoxious? I'm sure he's lovely in real life. I would feel just as passionately about him being locked up with very little or no reason whatsoever as I do about anybody else. And I should add that the woman who was locked up is not 100% earning my sympathy and support today, because she talks about how essentially it wasn't fair that she got locked up. She's an innocent person who was standing at the Mall minding her own business, planning to spot King Charles. And then all the people who were locked up who were standing at the Mall minding their own business, planning to protest. It's perfectly reasonable. The subtext of her comments are that they should have been locked up. So again, you've got that. It's really difficult to separate the principle of protest from the practice of a specific protest. How do you feel about protests? Can you answer that question? I'd have to know what you were protesting against, wouldn't I? Crikey, do you remember when all the racists took to the streets of London after the Black Lives Matter march, and you had a sort of Racism Matters march? I forget what the official title was. I mean, and if they had been badly treated by the police, as long as they hadn't broken the law themselves with regard to incitement, they were expressing opinions you found repellent, you'd have to be at least as cross, wouldn't you? Or close to as cross about them being treated appallingly by the police? That's the problem, isn't it? It's the relationship between the principle of protest and the practice. At least I think so. I didn't say they were protesting. I'm not. I mean, you've asked me to correct the record here. I will, but it doesn't need correcting. They were not part of the protest. The Westminster Night Stars were. Mick Wright's journalism is absolutely clear about this. They were not protesting. They were on their usual beat, which includes giving out rape alarms to lone females on the streets of Westminster at night while wearing fluorescent tabards that contain the logo of their partners, the Metropolitan Police. I can't stress this enough. They're absolutely not part of the protest, but they'd received intelligence, you see, the Metropolitan Police. You know them, the ones that found hundreds of pages of documents pertinent to the Daniel Morgan inquiry in a locked safe after 9 years. Back in January, they'd received intelligence that amazingly coincided entirely with a completely spurious story on the front page of the Mail on Sunday. So no, I don't mean to suggest that. 11:53 is the time. Fiona is in Kendal. Fiona, why do you think? Because you are cross enough. We have spoken before. You do feel the white heat of outrage. Why do you think other people fail to feel similarly about the assault on protest?
Well, I think there's a number of things going on, and I think you've just hit on one of them, and that is the very conscious othering of groups like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, and making them out to be are we crusties or are we young people who have been
trust funds,
manipulated?
Trustafarians, crusties. I mean, and that was perhaps there was an element of truth in that when Swampy was strutting his stuff. But you've got vicars, you've got people like you've got. I mean, the Extinction Rebellion and the Just Stop Oil activists are a million miles away from the lazy tabloid stereotype.
Completely. And right now I've got a friend who's a paramedic, and he's trying to talk to the hospital authorities where he works so that he can continue with his protesting. My partner has talked to the head teacher of his school to ask if he can, what would happen to him if he got arrested.
That's interesting.
And he was told that if he got linked to the school and therefore brought the school into disrepute, that would be a disciplinary offence.
Oh, this is huge.
Yeah. And the irony of this, so people are being silent.
Oh, this is huge. So you've got a peaceful protest. Suddenly the police have got the rights to lock you up, to arrest you for making a peaceful protest. The arrest, this is the point Betty and Pickering was making. The fear of getting a record then means you're not. So you've got a teacher, an upstanding member of society who cares passionately about the environment and the future of the planet, goes on a peaceful protest, gets his collar felt by, let's say, an institutionally corrupt police force in the case of the Met, and then his own job is in jeopardy because he's brought his employer into, quotes, disrepute, end quote.
Yes. And multiply that right across the country for people who are working for the national health and in education. Yeah. And these are the people who know the impact. Let's go back to the climate crisis. God. So they are passionately concerned for future generations, and they can't take the action they want to take to support those children. I've worked with children and young people all my life, and my heart is breaking for their future. And if I was teaching right now, because people have said to me, you're lucky you've retired, you haven't got that choice, Fiona. Yeah. But if I was teaching, how would I go to parents' evenings, James, and talk to parents about their kids' future when I know that loads of university students who are giving up their degrees because they know they haven't got one unless we stop all new oil and gas?
I mean, you wouldn't get into trouble for doing that.
But I would. That's all I would want to talk.
No,
to
I know it is.
About.
But
it would break my heart.
And then you wouldn't even be able to carry on teaching if you'd been arrested at a protest.
Teaching. And we have teachers and we have students all giving up their jobs and their future plans because they know there isn't a future, and yet they are being silenced. Can I tell you the other thing as well?
Of course.
People are being arrested and released under investigation, RUI. And some of the media are saying we can't talk to you if we're released on RUI.
That is and of course what happens then?
True.
What happens then is you revert to the stereotype. So the only people who will be able to protest are people who have opted out of society a bit, and my lazy stereotype about Swampy comes back into play, doesn't it? So in fact, what has motivated this legislation is the fact that the stereotypes have been completely exploded by reality. We see people like you, people like your partner, the retired accountants on top of trains, the vicars chaining themselves, and they can't cope with that because they look like Daily Mail readers and they're protesting against. So what the hell are we going to do? Criminalise them. And then they'll be too frightened to do it. Or enough of them will be too frightened to do it.
Yeah, and we knew this was coming. I mean, you did a programme. Well, I don't know, James. Don't do yourself down. You did
I'm a Catholic.
A programme
Goes
on
with the territory.
You did the programme on are we getting to a fashion? You know, you have those definitions
I have
of
used
going
the
on,
F word. You're right.
And we hit every one of them, and we're right in the thick of it now. People too frightened and too poor and too worried about their rent, their mortgage, their food to protest.
And we're back to George's line this morning in The Guardian. The more unequal a society becomes, the more oppressive its laws must be. Must is the key word there. Must be.
Absolutely. And the other thing is when people are frightened like they are now, they're frightened. They don't want to believe this.
No.
I'm hesitating for a word. This rubbish is happening to them. They want
not in
to
this
believe,
country, not here.
Yeah, exactly. So we've all been gaslit into thinking our police are great. And some of them are. Good God, I know some of them and they're brilliant. But they're struggling with this bill because it doesn't give them the definition. They're having to make things up on the spot.
And they're arresting journalists like Charlotte Lynch. They're also struggling with the calibre of new recruits, which I was reading about this morning. Some people with really dodgy records, right up to and including criminals, still getting through the police recruitment process. I presume because Suella Braverman is desperate to make announcements about how many new police they've managed to recruit. And so that bar gets ever lowered, even in the context of all the catastrophic stories and disgusting revelations that have come out involving police services in recent months. Thank you, Fiona. I always enjoy your calls, but that one will stay with me even more than usual, because that is, of course, that's what they've done. I hadn't even thought of that. Teachers, doctors, that sounded like we planned it, Keith, didn't it? Teachers, doctors, nurses, well, you name it. You've got an employer who you could bring into disrepute. Do you ever wonder why the Daily Mail goes into so much detail? They had a student nurse in the paper recently who I couldn't quite work out why they'd done a story about her. She was a student doctor, I think, sorry. So she wasn't even part of the strike, but I think she had some bikini pictures on her Instagram page, and she'd gone on holiday during the strike despite being in favour of it. She ends up with a full-page story in a national newspaper that everyone's going to see. That means next time the strikes come round, if she was not made of stern stuff, she'll be too frightened to say it. And this is the governmental equivalent of that sort of bullying. A lot of love for Fiona. I'm not surprised either. That opened up the story in a way that I had failed to do. But hey, in my defence, I'm the one that got Fiona to ring in, so it's all good. Speaking of my lengthy monologues, I think the last one it had about 6 minutes of warm up before I hit my mark. So we came out at 11:20. We should have come out. I should have hit my marks earlier, and we could have come out on time. I think I came out on time at 10:15, didn't I? So this is a what was it like topic. Do I need to explain the origins? I haven't done that for it. You don't think I need to explain it? Okay, well, right then. Blimey, everyone's a critic. I quite like that little anecdote about my childhood. I think it makes me come across as sort of charming. But no, apparently not. It's a story about what it's like being you. I mean, headlines that stop you in your tracks today, there's quite a lot of them. Having enough to pay for food is now the biggest money aspiration for under 25s. Where do you even start? What was your biggest money aspiration when you were under 25? Almost half of 10 to 25-year-olds are worried about affording things, have worried about affording things in the last 6 months, and those things include food. 75% of young people, a mere 75% of young people, think they will have enough to cover basics when they become adults. So home ownership, just think about this for a minute. Being able to afford food has now overtaken becoming a homeowner as the major measure of what youthful aspiration looks like. That's incredible. It's overtaken home ownership and a good job as a financial aspiration, having enough to pay for stuff. That saddens me. And it ties in with both of the conversations we've been having today. It's not the conversation we're having this hour. I was just referencing headlines that make you do at least a double take. And this one also focuses on under 25s because it's results of the census in 2021, which I would cautiously suggest to you that if this is from the 2021 census, the only way is up, as the great Yaz once famously observed. Do you play that when you're DJing? The Only Way Is Up by Yaz? Yeah, good. So you should. It's an absolute banger. Floor filler, right? Yeah, always. More than half of adults aged 24 or under in England and Wales live with their parents. That number's gone up by 13.6%. The number of families with adult children at home has gone up by 13.6%. That's a lot in the decade between 2011 and 2021. I will give you the money myself, as the great Les Dennis used to say. I will give you the money myself if that number hasn't gone up considerably more in the last 2 years, because half of that includes lockdown periods and all sorts of rearrangements of social and familial setups. Adults living with parents are more likely to be unemployed or providing unpaid care, and men outnumber women at a ratio of about 3 to 2. That bit hasn't changed much. It's it's not with love and respect. It's not the people providing unpaid care that I am interested in today, because I know why you're doing it, and I think you're amazing, and I really do. But it's the people who weren't expecting this that I want to talk to. And because I'm feeling a little bit cocky after how well the last hour went, despite me and the producer thinking that conversations about protests don't always get the switchboard singing, I'm going to try this hour to... Is oscillate the right word? What's the right word to go one to the other? I want to talk to a child who's living at home, and then a parent, and then a child, and then a parent, and then an adult child. Is that an oxymoron? Of course it isn't. No, it's not. You can be an adult child. I'm my mum's son. I'm my mum's child, even though I'm 51. So we will go adult child parent, adult child parent, adult child parent. Can we try and do that? I just think that'll mix it up a little bit. And the question is, if you unexpectedly found yourself living with your parents, or if you unexpectedly welcomed your adult child back into your home, back into the family home, I just want you to call me and tell me how it's going. There's no politics in this. I appreciate that the economic situation is going to have been an enormous driver of an awful lot of these familial domestic rearrangements, but I just want to know how it's going. My sister still lives, or doesn't still live. My sister moved out, moved back in again, variety of reasons. It fills me with joy that they've got each other, and it's not an unalloyed good thing. It might be, there might be even better scenarios, but generally speaking, it's not a negative for either mum nor sister. So, what's it like for you? I obviously, being a bit of a gossip, I find myself hoping it's awful. I don't mean that in an unpleasant way. I just mean, I know what my dad would be like. My dad, if he was still alive and I had to move back in again, he'd never stop going on about it. Secretly, he'd be delighted that we got to spend extra time together. But publicly, or certainly to my face, it would be banter central. He'd be a bantersaurus. He'd be the Archbishop of Banterbury. He'd be giving me jip about it all the time. So I get that. And I just want to know. So let's get those phone lines open. 8 minutes after 12. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. You have unexpectedly moved back in with mum and dad, or you haven't left. I suppose we have to include you as well. You thought you'd have a place of your own by now, but you don't. What was it like? 0345 6060 973. Or your little treasures, your little ducklings have waddled back home again after you thought you could have turned their room into an office or a home gym by now. 0345 6060 973. And listen, I hope this doesn't sound rude, but you have to have something interesting to say. So it's all right, really. It's fine. Don't ring in. People do, all right? And it makes the job of the producers hard. If people say, it's all right, really, I haven't really thought about it. You have to have something interesting to say. You have to have something lined up, something ready that is of interest. And you've been surprised by a positive or a negative, whatever it may be. But the numbers are rising, and I'm fairly confident they would have risen even further in the last 2 years. The census actually just covers the period up to 2021. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And then, of course, what about couples moving in? What about couples? So, that would be... Oh, that's the third category. Because moving in with your own parents is one thing, right? Moving in with your partner's parents. I'd love my mother-in-law, but that would have been tricky. Because I can't relax in the same way in her house that I can relax in my mum's house. Yeah, I get to mum's, I open the fridge. First thing I do, open the fridge, see what they've got in there. Oh, that's nice. When did you start buying that? Oh, I'll have that. I can't do that at my mother-in-law. I can't turn up at my mother-in-law's, open the fridge and just sort of, I don't know, have a spoonful of Nutella. So there's three categories here. There's you've just moved, alternate was the word I was looking for. Thank you, John. Not oscillate, alternate. So... three categories. I think the alternate plan's gone out it's all about the bangers now. We're talking about alternate now, after talking about Yaz a minute ago. I think that might not work now. We've got three categories of contributor. Number one, you've either never moved out or you've moved back in with your own parents at a stage in your life where you were pretty sure that you would have had a place of your own. 0345 6060 973. Number two, you have moved in to your partner's parents' house. And that doesn't need any caveats because there's no way you grew up in your partner's parents' house. That would be weird. So you have moved into your partner's parents' house, 0345 6060 973. And number 3, you are mum or dad, and you have welcomed the little ducklings back into the family home, or you've never got them out, despite the fact that at this stage in your life you had quite rightly presumed that you would have got your house back. No one thinks like that as a parent. They would have got a home of their own. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Should we start with Jack in Hemel Hempstead? Why not? And there you go. It's 12 minutes after 12. It's the shortest intro of the week. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Well, my new wife and I are the little ducklings who have just returned back to her parents' home.
Oh.
We got married last month and have just moved in a couple of weeks ago. And we want to save for a house, basically, rather than going and trying to rent and then maybe never getting off the renting market.
No, I get it.
So,
I sympathise.
Yeah, so we're now 2 weeks in, and there's been, as I said to your producer, an adjustment period, I would call it.
It's your parents, is it?
No, it's her parents.
Oh. So that's harder for you than her, I think.
Actually, I would say probably the opposite.
Go on, tell me more.
My wife tends to be more stressed out by them than I am. I can just brush off what they say and ignore them. But they have been recently more intrusive, let's say, into our private life and things that we're thinking and doing.
In what way?
And so,
do they know you're on the radio? I don't want to get you into trouble.
They're not LBC listeners.
What?
I know. Well,
move out now. How can you stay? Get out now, Jack! Quick, before it's too late.
I mentioned Mystery Hour and it went right over their heads.
Never mind. So what are they doing? Talk to me about the intrusiveness.
Well, we took a pregnancy test just for the sake of, I don't know what the word would be, just to put our minds at rest that we weren't pregnant.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be very funny to wind her mother up to show her it and pretend that we were pregnant.
Right.
And then have the big reveal. But it led to a not so funny moment where we had to have a family meeting and they basically told us that we weren't to be pregnant and that was the rule.
Don't get pregnant while you're living here.
Yes, which to some extent I understand. But I suppose on the other side, there was an element to which I said, look, I think there's a bit too much of an inclusion, or you trying to include yourself, in my personal life.
Right.
And so we had that conversation yesterday. We are away for a week this week, so we could leave it time to settle in. But I would say the conversation went mediumly well, but not fantastically.
Have we got examples of? I don't keep Nutella in the fridge. Sorry, I misspoke. I mean, nor does my mother-in-law. I just want to clear that up. I just want to clear that up for the record. What? Can you give me an example of? Is it him or her? Is it the father-in-law that is being nosy?
It would depend on the day.
Okay.
If I'm honest, and on the subject. But I would say it's a bit of both. But I mean, don't get me wrong. They are both really lovely.
Well, clearly they're letting you live in their house rent-free, is it?
Well. It is indeed, actually, yes. So one can't complain too much. But there is the element to which, like I say,
I want an example. I want to know. I want to imagine it's me and my wife. What are they poking their nose into? I mean, apart from laying down the law on getting pregnant.
So another one would be careers. So we are not very money motivated people. We want to have a good living and we want to live all right. But we don't want to be rich, right? So we don't want to have these big highfalutin careers.
No.
But there's, again, this added pressure where we are asked to sort of have good jobs or whatever.
Have you got a job?
We are currently looking. I've just finished my PhD.
Oh, okay.
And so I thought it'd be easy to get a job, but it turns out they're not so interested.
And they don't understand that, and they're putting pressure on you. So, I mean, this is quite a traditional dynamic. It's just happening. It's being massively exacerbated because they probably feel this way and want these conversations with you, even if you didn't live there. But the fact that you do live there means that you're being exposed to it a heck of a lot more.
Indeed.
Well, how old are you?
I'm 28, so I'm getting a bit too old now to be living in a place like that.
Well, I wish you well. I really do. And I mean, enjoy the week off. Crikey. Make it count. Because goodness knows what you're going to be going back to. It's 12:15. It is 18 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What's it like? There we go. Katie's in Paddington. If my plan is coming together, you should be a parent whose adult child has moved back in, Katie.
That's correct.
How's it all going?
As I predicted, it's quite difficult. So my son, 27, and his girlfriend have sort of been forced, really, to move back in with us because they've been squeezed out of the rental market. Yes. They were renting a very small one-bedroom flat for £1,400, and the landlord upped it by another £900 a month.
Well, I mean, to be fair, as we discovered in the first hour, his mortgage might have gone up by that much, but it doesn't help.
Right.
It doesn't help your boy.
Right. No, exactly. So anyway, I said, what can you do? They looked for more other rentals, and they were all the sort of same price, as you say, because mortgages had gone up.
Yeah.
So they moved in this week. And as I predicted, the laundry is colossal.
Do they just leave it in the basket?
Well, in fairness, my son does do his laundry, but it's just everywhere, hanging about everywhere. And it's sort of the cleaning up afterwards, the bathroom, the floor soaking wet, all of the normal sort of, it's almost like having a teenager back.
It's not almost like it is exactly like having a teenager back. It's just not quite as smelly.
And now I've got two, so not just the son, but I've got his girlfriend as well.
Is she not a bit better about the house than he is? Only because she'd be less relaxed than him. I'm not doing any casual sexism here.
Not really.
Right,
no, it's actually the other way round. He's probably a little bit better than she is, because she leaves for work very early and gets back late. So that's her off the hook.
Yeah. So you've got laundry, you've got kitchen issues, cleaning up issues, bathroom issues.
Absolutely.
Can't go on like this. What are you going to do?
And I don't know. I really don't know. We said we'd give them a year to save up and try and get a deposit for a house.
Yes.
I don't know if we'll all be able to last a year.
How long has it been?
Honesty.
How long has it been?
I mean, this is the first week. And I'm already late to work because I've been cleaning up after.
Oh, Lord above. Do you get, I mean, it's too early probably to say, and I don't want to put thoughts in your head to make things even choppier moving forward, but if I mean, the worse it goes and the more desperate you become for them, even if they stay a year, then every time they spend money on something else, you're going to get the hump, aren't you? You're going to be like, why are you going out to the cinema tonight? You could be saving that towards the deposit that you're going to need when we throw you out in a year's time.
Exactly. That is a conversation I think we're going to all have this weekend. This weekend is going to be about the saving, the rent, the heating's been on as well to dry all the washing. So
how many clothes does he get through?
A lot.
Why?
He goes to the gym. He has his work clothes. Then he has the night clothes.
He changes into his casual clothes when he gets in from work, and then he's got his gym kit on his.
Yeah.
Sheesh! I thought they were supposed to be environmentally friendly. This generation.
No, not at all.
No. And are they going to be surprised to discover that you already feel you need to have a summit? Do you think, or do they think it's all going? Do you reckon it's all going brilliantly? I love it.
I don't think they do think that, because they're also complaining that they're not on a king size bed but on a double bed. And I'm thinking, you should know how I feel.
You should be so lucky. There'll be room service next. They'll be complaining about the decor. So I wish you well, but it's not. I mean, it's funny up to a point, and the point where it stops being funny is that when you actually think we can't. I don't think we can go on like this.
I know. Well, I think. As a couple of my friends have said, you're just going to have to button it and be patient.
Up to a point, Lord Copper. I wish you all well, but my sympathies at the moment obviously lie more with you. 23 minutes after 12. Just thinking of that show, wasn't it? What was it called? Rhys Dinsdale, who's a great presence on Twitter, the actor Rhys Dinsdale, was in that thing with John Thor, wasn't he? Do you remember? And it was, they unexpectedly found themselves living back together again. It's that shows my age. Max is in Stansted. Max, what made you pick up the phone?
Hey, so I've been living at home for the last 3 years. I'm 29 years old, and I've been kind of fighting off this feeling of like shame at having to move back and live with my mother as a 29-year-old man, because to me it gives me a feeling of being like a teenager, a child. It kind of,
I can imagine,
it mentally throws me back to that place of like that I'm not in charge and I'm not the master of my place.
Is it comforting to discover that you're part of a rapidly expanding group at all?
Yeah, it feels like a sort of like relief of, we're all going through it together, because the majority of my friends are the same age, of all university educated, got full-time jobs. Some aren't employed, but the majority of us are university educated, have had some sort of apprenticeship, and have got a job. done everything that, we were sort of told to do that seemed like the right thing to do. And it just seems like owning a property is such a far reach. And, for me, I've suffered with anxiety and depression, just kind of inherited and from, the way I've lived my life.
Yes.
And it feels like, how am I going to be able to do this, to live.
And then that adds to your anxiety, potentially that adds to your anxiety, of course. You start worrying about stuff over which you have little or no control, and things can spiral again. Rent's going to be, it is already, but we talked about mortgages in the first hour with a little side order of how that will knock onto the rental market. But the rental market is broken, isn't it?
It's dire. Yeah. My experience, when I was a student, I was renting, and that was a kind of like a chicken and egg experience where the landlords are expecting you to be a terrible tenant. And so you kind of get treated like it. So in the houses I was in, I was always ended up being sort of the most confrontational person there to try and get things fixed.
It's a nightmare.
It's an absolute nightmare, and you're really at the behest of someone who just owns your property. And it's I feel like the more and more it goes on, the more and more I kind of start to go to the sort of stoic philosophical side of things and go, look at the past 200 years, look at the past 300 years of history, and think, actually, I have a roof over my head, I have energy while we can still afford it. It's warm, it's safe, it's dry.
How does Mum feel about it, do you think? Does Mum like having you there?
I live on her own, so I think she likes having me there.
Yeah, take that into account, Max.
Presence,
Take that into account when you're being hard on yourself, that you're actually, it's a silver lining. I'm not denying the existence of the cloud, but from your mum's point of view, I bet she loves having you there.
Yeah, I think she does. I think it's mainly me that doesn't want to be there.
Yeah, no, I get that, but ask her tonight, and then when she tells you that, God, this could backfire horribly, in which case never ring me again. But but if you ask her tonight and she said, of course, I love it, I really love it, and that'll make you feel a lot better about things. I bet it would me.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right.
Well, that's worth it. That's got to be worth a chat.
Yeah.
Buy a bunch of tulips as well before you get in tonight. Mind how you go, Max. 12:26 is the time. Neil is in South Hams in Devon. Neil, what made you pick up the phone?
I'm the same age as you, James, albeit about 4 weeks younger. And 6 years ago we moved in with my mother-in-law. A lot of it happened through circumstance, but basically my father-in-law died really unexpectedly, and he was mid-50s. And my wife was spending 4 or 5 nights a week with her in Plymouth, so probably about a 20, 30-minute drive from where we used to live on the coast. We had a beautiful flat, 2 double bedrooms overlooking the estuary in Kingsbridge.
I know Kingsbridge, lovely. Yeah.
It was on the one-way system, so you've probably driven past it.
But your wife needed to look after her mum, so it made more sense for you both to move back there.
And that's exactly, that was it. Yeah, our rent was, for a 2 double bedroom flat, we were paying $550 a month, and in the 5-6 years we were there, it went up £50.
Yeah,
unheard of in these days.
Yes, of course.
And we were saving for a house, and that was like our next step. We'd gotten married, we were going to buy a house, and then we've had our son. We had that conversation. We moved in. We paid a nominal amount of rent. I work from home, but I used to be a chef, and so when they both went out to work, I'd cook dinner. When they'd come home.
And you're still there now? You're still there 6 years later?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. So we've bought our house. We were there 14 months, and don't get me wrong, it's hard. My mother-in-law is lovely. She really is. But you just can't help but feeling judged. She wasn't judging me, not at all. Can't help it.
I always think of gears. There's gears of relaxation, isn't there? And there's a gear you can't. There's a gear you can't get to if you're not in your own gaff, I think.
It's having familiar things around you. So we had our own bedroom, and then we'd have dinner together, watch a little bit of TV, and then I'd go upstairs, turn the PlayStation on, and that would be me for the night. You're right. The gears of relaxation.
You are the same age as me. You're the PlayStation. And simple question: Do you think it was harder for you or your wife?
Probably me.
Okay. That's 1-1, I think, on that, because I can see why. Because you're not going to feel that you're being treated like you were when you were a child, because it's not your mum. Whereas I could see how it might have gone the other way. But I'm glad it's all sorted. Coming up to 12:30. Home to Roost. Everyone stopped texting me. Home to Roost. John, of course it was Home to Roost. It's a lovely show, but it shows our age, doesn't it? That's the one where Rhys Dinsdale plays the son, who I think moves back in after getting divorced, does he? I may have misremembered. But anyway, it's not Sorry. That was Ronnie Corbett, you prunes, not Rhys Dinsdale. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. It is 12:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to play a little clip from about half an hour ago, just over half an hour ago. So it will sound like it's the top of the hour. I don't know how much you set your clock by the noises that are coming out of your radio, but you know when Keith presses that magic button and it all goes all portentous at the top of the hour, we've got a sort of 60-second build-up in the background. So I'm going to play a clip of what I said 35 minutes ago for reasons that will soon become clear. But do not adjust your radio. It is not the build-up to the 12 noon news. It's currently 12:34. Teachers, doctors, nurses, well, you name it. You've got an employer who you could bring into disrepute. Do you ever wonder why the Daily Mail goes into so much detail? They had a student nurse in the paper recently who I couldn't quite work out why they'd done a story about her. She was a student doctor, I think, sorry. So she wasn't even part of the strike, but I think she had some bikini pictures on her Instagram page, and she'd gone on holiday during the strike despite being in favour of it. She ends up with a full-page story in a national newspaper that everyone's going to see. That means next time the strikes come round, if she was not made of stern stuff, she'll be too frightened to say it. And this is the governmental equivalent of that sort of bullying. But again, it's not the news. Don't panic. That story was even worse from the Daily Mail's point of view than I remembered, because it involved a medical student who was a prolific campaigner for NHS strikes and took some time off, as she's perfectly entitled to do, to undergo some cosmetic surgery, which I would argue is quite potentially an invasion of her privacy as well. And then finds herself plastered all over the Daily Mail. It's incredible. And as if by magic, she's on the line. So I presume, Ailey Garrett, I presume someone alerted you to the fact that I was taking your name in vain.
No, they have twice, and then also I think Nick Ferrari had done it too. And I just wanted, I suppose, clear up a few things, because I think it's much worse than perhaps people give credit for.
Yes.
And if you don't mind, can I tell you what they actually printed in the Daily Mail?
You can tell me everything you want, Ailey. Seriously.
Bear in mind I'm a medical student, but I don't know how this makes sense. They said, young medic on nursing picket line missed strike week to get liposuction.
Yes.
And then underneath it says, and then two big photos of me, and then underneath it says, striking nurses put cancer patients at risk, which is obviously very deliberate and awful. Yeah,
so subliminally it's linking you to the idea of putting cancer patients at risk, even though you're neither a nurse nor on strike. And of course, the headline isn't even fair on nurses who were on strike.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'd make the point of saying I'm no more relevant to the strikes than anyone's like next door neighbour or the last caller or anyone else.
Because you're a student.
Yeah, I'm a student. I can't strike. And actually, they talk about how I previously supported the strikes, which I have. But the previous strikes were during my Easter holidays. I have never actually been on a picket line. I say that shamefully. I wish I had found the time, but I just didn't have the time. And so they've done this big story about this one day that I wasn't on the pickets, but I've never been on the pickets.
What the hell happened?
So, unbeknownst to me, I'd had a private Twitter for a bit. I was going through how there was a bereavement in the family.
I'm sorry.
And I didn't know the whole time a Daily Mail reporter was following me. And I was not very mentally well at the time, I'll be honest.
Okay.
So I was under the crisis team. And he was going through my tweets at this time, knowing that. And I know that he'd seen the tweets because he references that I maybe wasn't starting medicine in July because I'll be a doctor in July. And I said that was for intense personal reasons,
right,
and wanted advice. And then he used that tweet in the article to insinuate that I wasn't starting because of the money.
But, okay, why you? Do you have any understanding of why this person... I mean, I'll read the two bylines on the story because they must be very proud of their work, otherwise they'd have taken their names off it. So it's written by Stephen Matthews, the health editor, and Emily Stern, a health reporter for Mail Online. Why were they looking at you at all?
Because I'd done a few tweets. So, for example, I'd done one saying that...
No, I know, but everyone's... I mean, Twitter's full of tweets. Why did they pick on you, do you think?
I think because they were getting a lot of interaction. I think people find it very shocking how much time I spent in uni, how much debt I'm in, and how much...
Okay, so you'd gathered a bit of a following with your sort of tales from inside medical student life.
Yeah, so I'd got I think in the millions of views, and I think they...
Okay, so they picked up on that. They found you, and then they sought to turn you over because you went away to get some liposuction and therefore didn't attend a strike that you wouldn't have been on anyway.
Yeah, and they're using me as a lesson that if you stick your head up above the parapet, you are free game, and we will invade your privacy and use your photos. You know, I was getting hate mail saying I'd be an awful doctor. I was borderline getting harassed by some people, and you try not to, but you read all those comments just saying how awful you're going to be.
Yeah.
And it was really heartbreaking because they twisted so much of things that I'd said.
I'm still confused about what the target they thought that you had painted on your back was, and I used to do that for a living. I used to be a newspaper journalist. How can I ask how you felt? And I'm conscious of your mental health, so we don't need to go into anything that makes you uncomfortable. How did you feel? Did someone ring you and tell you about it? Did you stumble across it yourself? Did you? When you saw this, because there's a picture of you in I'm very old, Ailey. I'd call it a party dress. So the invasion of the. How did you feel when you saw that spread out?
Well, they rang me a few days before and were like, "Oh, we're just ringing you," and they wouldn't really audibly say what newspaper they were calling from. They kept mumbling, and I had to ask 4 times. And then I said, "Well, what's your story?" And they were like, "Well, you've got liposuction and you support the junior doctor strikes." And I said, "I'm confused."
You and me both.
And then I just said, "I'm not going to talk to you." I contacted my trade union, who found out a bit more information. And we just said, well, if we both don't comment, this will be a nothing story. It doesn't mean anything. Next thing I know, it's on the Mail Online. I was absolutely humiliated because loads of people were saying, well, you know, if you're going to be like someone that gets lots of interactions on Twitter, you've got to expect this kind of thing. And I was like, I have 10,000 followers. It's not, you know, I'm not a celebrity. I'm a normal person, just supporting. And I just, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I just felt, I feel embarrassed, and I feel it's something that people are going to Google me and is going to follow me through my career.
They'll do what I'm doing. I mean, listen, I probably, if there's anything I'm qualified to offer advice on, it's internet trolls, and the people, normal people, don't register. And if they did read this, they'd think exactly what I'm thinking. I mean, you could see in that little thing when I mentioned you a moment ago, is I'm baffled. I just remember seeing it and thinking, what on earth are they doing? Even by their standards, which are non-existent, there is no rationale whatsoever for this story about this young woman with the headline, "Sorry I couldn't join you on the picket line. I was too busy getting lipo. Glam rabble-rousing medical student 26 who thinks junior doctors should get more than a 35% pay rise. Missed 4-day strike to undergo cosmetic surgery." It's absolutely appalling journalism as much as anything else. So please take it from me as an old git that you don't really need to worry. I know it's a pain and it's a violation to think that if people Google your name, they will find this. But anybody whose opinion is worth worrying about will think what we all think, listening to this and reading this, which is what the hell were they playing at? What on earth were they doing? I need to ask, though, has it dented your determination to be publicly supportive of issues like industrial action?
Well, at first it had, and I was like, I'm going to keep quiet, just keep my head down and just get through the rest of med school. And then the head of my med school actually called me later that day, and the head of my hospital too, and said, "We're completely behind you." And then... spent a few days thinking, keep my head down. But then I thought, that's what they want. And actually, if people are resonating with what I'm saying, I'm doing this from a perspective of the NHS will fail if we don't retain doctors. I can see how many of my colleagues want to go to Australia. I want the NHS to exist. I'm not going to back down from that. It's not about greed. It's not about money. And if they want to paint it as such, let them.
No, I know. I'm glad about that, because you've got to look after yourself. That's the top priority. But that's wonderful that the hospital and the medical school. Do you want to mention where you are or not? Because they'd possibly don't worry about that.
No, I'm fine. Do you know what, actually, because it's quite funny, because it shows how bad their journalism is, because they said I went to Newcastle University in the article, so I do. But they also said I live in Manchester, and I've never lived in Manchester in my life.
So the hospital and the university in Newcastle came through for you. They offered their full support, and presumably, like everybody listening to this conversation now, wondering what on earth, let's get their names again, Ailey, because we all know what it's like to see, Stephen Matthews and Emily Stern, what on earth they were thinking of. No clue
I mean, the only good news is myself and one of my friends is actually a photographer and took the photo on holiday, are invoicing them for the images because they're not allowed to use them.
That's why I knew about it. That's what I saw. That's the thing that drew me in. That was the first, because you pointed that out, I think, didn't you?
Yeah.
And that's what drew me in, because I don't routinely find myself trawling through the Mail online reading stories about completely blameless medical students spending their own money on medical procedures or cosmetic procedures. It's not something my algorithm throws up with regularity. Have you submitted any official complaints or anything like that?
Yeah, but Ipsos they're just not bothered. But the money that we do get, and we think we will get, we'll be donating to the BMA strike fund. So they've kind of shot themselves in the foot.
That's lovely stuff. Ailey, thank you. I'm glad someone alerted you to the fact. No, thank you. But maybe restored a little bit of your faith in the UK media, which, goodness me, must have been shaken to the core by that absolute apology for journalism by Mail Online. 1:45. I mean, by Mail Online standards, to be. And I thought they'd gone through the bottom of the barrel years ago, but it turns out there is another depth as yet unplumbed that they're capable of reaching, and we just heard about it. It is 12:48, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Funnily enough, it's almost like we planned this stuff. There was no Ray Liotta for Ailey, for everyone who was asking, because she wasn't actually listening when we talked about her, although she has obviously listened to LBC in the past. She was alerted to the fact that we were talking about her by a friend, so you don't quite get a Ray Liotta. I know that sounds strict, but Keith is absolutely adamant on this matter, and he is the gatekeeper, the Ray keeper. This sounds like we've planned it, because this week's guest on Full Disclosure, I mean, such a lovely lad. Sound like I'm so old now. Jack Whitehall, quite young for Full Disclosure, but he's packed quite a lot into his shortish life. And also, I don't know if you can tell this. I don't think you can tell it from the clip, but he was in pieces when he came in, because he'd been on stage the previous night, and then the car had broken down on the way back from Burnley. He'd been stuck on the hard shoulder for 4 hours waiting for the RAC to turn up. He'd had no sleep, but he turned up anyway, and he didn't have to. We used to, people pulling out of interviews at short notice and with or without good reason. It would have been perfectly understandable if he didn't fancy doing it. But he turned up, and there were a couple of moments in the interview I thought he might be on the verge of throwing up. He just, when you're that tired, you kind of almost got your gag reflex. I could be wrong, but I just want to say that because I was expecting to really, really like him. And I really, really liked him, and you will too. But this clip, I think, touches upon that notion of moving or living with your parents at an age when perhaps you might have been expecting not to. What were your sort of enthusiasms? When were you a good student? Were you academic? Did you enjoy?
I don't know. I was relatively academic. I struggled a little. The other issues that the day school that I went to in London, I was really struggling. I was academically behind everyone else. I hadn't found any of my kind of like passions or flourished in any way, really. It was quite very awkward, was bullied a little bit, and just didn't really enjoy where I was, and was quite unhappy, I guess. So when they took me to this other school, the Dragon, and sent me there, which was this like amazing, eccentric, like kind of like magical place. I loved that school and met like teachers that really were very attentive and helped me. And
how old were you?
I was 9.
Okay.
9 years old, yeah. And met really good friends and sort of came into my own a little bit. So I think because what was happening before wasn't great, I appreciated it all the more. And my dad also famously promised me, he was like, oh, if you don't like it after a time, we'll take you back. You can go back and go to the day school in London. And I was like, that really helped, knowing that, and you telling me that was really, really helpful. And many years later, he was like, oh, of course it was a complete lie. There was absolutely no way you were going to be taken out of that school having worked so hard to get you in there. But I think maybe he's playing up to that a little bit as well.
What passions did you discover then?
I mean, drama and art. I loved art. I was basically at school. I was obsessed with drawing and painting and art. My dad is a huge art collector, and he kind of really nurtured that passion of mine. I went to my secondary school on an art scholarship. I left that school and went to the Chelsea School of Art as well. That was going to be my path in life. Was going to be an artist, and Chelsea School of Art. I always forget.
When was that? Sixth form or after sixth form?
No, that was after sixth form.
So you did A-levels and then you went to Chelsea School. That's when you were living at home for a year.
Yeah, and I was going to Chelsea School of Art and living with my mum and dad, it was like, I think I only did like 3 months, and I was like, oh, this isn't for me, and left and went off and did a
Why wasn't it for you? Because you weren't as good as you wanted to be, or?
Yeah, partly that, and also I guess I was just I don't know, maybe because I was brought up in this house where I was surrounded by all of these, 20th century watercolours that my father collected, and quite traditional art, and I had quite a traditional approach, and I liked quite representational portraiture. And that's what I did. It was all a bit old-fashioned, and the Chelsea School of Art was this like vibrant, exciting place with all these, radical young people doing like really exciting contemporary art. And then I was just in the corner with my easel, wanting to paint paintings that looked like they belonged in the 18th century. So yeah, it wasn't a great fit.
But what about we jumped ahead a bit, but we can always come back. What about ambition? I mean, did you have dreams of artistic success, or was it just one of those fortuitous situations where you were doing the thing that you loved, and it was also what you studied? I mean, would you, if I'd met you then and said, what are you going to be when you graduate or when you grow up, would you have said an artist? A watercolourist?
Yeah, a watercolourist. I would have genuinely. That's
rather charming.
It is rather charming, isn't it? And I had a painting. I was very excited. I can't remember where it was displayed, but some painting that was displayed in an art gallery. And I remember being so excited about that. And I used to do these portraits of like family friends. I painted a portrait of Edward Fox, who was one of my father's clients. I painted a portrait of my father, which they still have up in their house, that looks like he's got jaundice, but it's quite a good likeness. And would paint my friends as well when I was...
Do you ever get the brushes out?
No, I've literally never gone anywhere near it. I painted Giles Brandreth's wife's cat as well.
Okay. All the greats.
My claim to fame, a real humble brag. She asked me to do it, and she wanted me to do sittings as well, so I went round to their house.
With the cat?
But yes,
yeah.
I sat in a room with Giles Brandreth's wife's cat, and it obviously wouldn't sit still because it's a cat. I had to do 3 hours over the course of 5 weeks, and then
were they pleased?
Yeah, they were pleased with what I I just ended up, because the cat obviously was just running around the room, I ended up just Googling the cat from Sabrina the Teenage Witch and doing a pretty accurate copy of that and handing that in, and she seemed content.
It's very good, I promise. It's a proper... And I'm going to tweet, if you follow me on Twitter, I'm going to tweet a picture of the cat, just in case you thought he was making that up. Giles Brandreth, 4 years ago, tweeted a picture of the cat just to prove that the story was actually true. So that's this week's Full Disclosure, which you can download at Global Player, along with all the other goodies that you can find there. And tickets for his tour are available now. He's on the road with a big new show, which is, as he talks about in the interview, he loves it, because now he's a Hollywood star. He could just live in Los Angeles making movies, but he needs to get out on the road. And those tickets are available at his website. But I'll tweet the picture now, and then probably the last word on what it's like to have the kids move back in, or vice versa, from Debbie in Guildford. Debbie, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello, Debbie.
Oh gosh, mine follows from a cat.
Yes, I know. Well, I know. Well, take it away.
Oh, right. My son said in October last year that the cats, they had a family friend that was going to have to put the cat into care. Would I take it on? Because I'd lost a cat after 14 years. And I said, temporarily.
We're talking about children moving back.
It's moving on.
Oh, all right.
So I said, yes, okay, temporarily.
I've got a minute and a half. I've got a minute and a half, and we're still with the cat.
So I took on the cat. Yeah, it was their cat, not my cat.
Yes.
They moved in.
Oh, they followed the cat.
They moved in. My son and his partner moved in about 6 weeks later, took over the cat, because it was intended to be their cat. They didn't tell me that. Anyway, fun and laughter is an absolute joke. An absolute joke.
You're not enjoying it?
I'm not.
Oh.
I am and I'm not. I find the funny side of it.
Yeah, clearly.
They took over the cat and decided they were going to deal with the cat their way.
But what's it like? Well, I mean, let's stop talking about the cat and tell me what it's like to have your son and his partner living with you.
Oh, my God. Tell me. Oh, please. They're awful.
They're awful?
I love them.
But they're awful. You sound like Frankie Howard.
I absolutely love them.
But
the laziest people I ever drew breath on.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm absolutely.
So you're
serious.
following them around? What, hand and foot? Is it, Debbie? Hand and foot? You're waiting on them?
I do the washing. I do the cooking. I do the cleaning. I do the shopping. I do everything else.
Do they do anything?
They breathe.
Is it a big house? Can you hide from them?
No, it's a one-bedroom flat.
Oh my days! Well, where do they sleep?
My bedroom.
What?
Yeah. I live in the living room.
Oh.
And I put you up.
Oh dear. So you have to wait until they've gone to bed before you can go to bed?
Kind of, yeah.
Debbie, we've run out of time, which is a shame, frankly, because I feel we've only scratched the surface of your story.
You couldn't even make it up, mate.
No, well, I wouldn't. Thank you. I wish you well. Seriously, chuck them out. Go on, change the locks. It is coming up to 1 o'clock. You have been listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Don't forget, if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on, catch up on Global Player, rewind live radio, or enjoy the whole show podcast. All LBC shows there, including Jack Whitehall on Full Disclosure, as you just heard. So download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 It's time for Sheila Fogarty.